Hello everyone, my name is Vangeris, and today I'll be taking you through the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, or simply Skyrim, while talking about anything and everything on our way to Sovngarde. We'll go over the various quest lines available, as well as touching on other things here and there as we go through the walkthrough section. Then we'll end things with an analysis where we'll go over the atmosphere, lore, mechanics, and art of the game in a similar fashion to my previous commentaries. Then we'll end off with a conclusion of the game overall. If you want to skip to the analysis section if you've already played the game, there are timestamps in the description of the final video to take you wherever you want to go once it's uploaded, which will be a while, but give it time. Likewise, if you want to bounce around or head to a specific questline or section of the game, those also have timestamps in each video with the details for what questline we're tackling in the title of said video once they release. This commentary will be different from what I've done in the past, as there's so much to cover here that it takes multiple videos going over the major questlines and notable side quests, along with the analysis at the end. As per my usual format, the analysis is at the end of this project, so it will be found in the final part of this series, as mentioned before. I'm trying to get all these videos uploaded in a timely manner, but we'll see how it goes. One thing is certain, I will finish this series. It should also be noted that this is the Enhanced Special Edition on the PC, which came out several years after the initial release back in 2011, so some things will be different from the original version, and weird things will pop up such as certain mods that came with the game, and some of the changes from the original. In my experience, it's largely the same as the original release. I will try to avoid doing anything that is non-original to the initial version of the game for the sake of consistency. Finally, feel free to leave a comment with your stories, opinions, and criticisms as this series goes on, as I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this game one way or another. It helps me iron out the kinks in future videos by letting me know if I get anything wrong, word things poorly, or generally suck at something and need to improve. I welcome the comments and criticism. It helps me improve and grow. Now let's get into Bethesda's cash cow. Skyrim begins the main questline with the player being brought to a village as a prisoner. We'll interact with Ralof, who says we fell into an Imperial ambush before being captured. We'll meet Ulfric Stormcloak, the leader of the Stormcloaks and the Rebellion, who has a rag around his mouth as he can use shouts to cast spells. We'll go over that later. We'll also meet Lokir, who was a thief trying to steal a horse to get out of here, but was caught during the ambush. We learn that the man in charge of our capture, Imperial General Tullius, is in league with the Thalmor, elves that Ralof despises. He'll also recall knowing a girl here in Helgen named Vilod, who would mix juniper berries into mead that he used to love. Then he mentions how Imperial walls used to make him feel so safe as a boy. You'll notice a boy watching us before his father tells him to get inside the house. So many little details in the NPC interactions in this game, as you'll see. Then we learn we're stopping, and it's the end of the line. We'll be called to the block one at a time, where Lokir will run for it, but will be shot by archers before he can escape. Then we'll be asked to step forward, and Hadvar will ask who we are. Then we'll create our character. You can choose between Argonians, Bretons, Dark Elves, High Elves, Imperials, Khajiit, Nords, Orcs, Redguard, or Wood Elves as your starting race, each with their own racial abilities and perks. I usually prefer the Nord option, as they tend to get the least number of restrictions when it comes to some of the features of the game, but each race has their own benefits, as we'll see when we get to some of the other questlines we'll take part in. You can also customize their appearance, so make them as pretty or ugly as you want. Once we're ready, Dragonborn Dan will be born, then we'll head over to the rest of the group. General Tullius will say that some in Helgen would call Ulfric a hero, but a hero doesn't use a power like the Voice to murder his king and usurp his throne. Then he proclaims that Ulfric started this war, and that plunged Skyrim into chaos, and now the Empire is going to put him down and restore the peace. Then we'll hear a sound come from far away, before Tullius brushes it off, and we continue. A priestess will issue our last rites before one of the Stormcloaks angrily walks forward to get this over with, as he calls upon Talos. He says his ancestors are smiling at him, and asks if the Imperials can say the same, before he's beheaded. Then we hear a few reactions, with one coming from a man named Vilod, calling it justice. Maybe Ralof doesn't remember Vilod being a man because he was so drunk from the mead, but I digress. We'll be called forward before we hear the sound again. We'll get down on the block when we witness a spiky dragon fly in and land on the tower before it uses a shout to cause fire and brimstone to rain from the sky. Now you have some control over your character, and we'll follow Ralof into a nearby tower where he'll ask Ulfric if the legends of dragons are true. Ulfric will reply, saying legends don't burn down villages. We'll head upstairs when the dragon breaks through the wall and burns one of the Stormcloaks. We'll jump out to the inn on the other side and drop back to the ground level, where we'll run into Hadvar telling a boy to come toward him to keep him out of the dragon's fire. We'll follow Hadvar as we make our way through the ruins as the dragon continues to attack the town and the Imperial troops try to take him down. Ralof will run into us just before we enter the keep, where they have a back and forth about the prisoners escaping, and Hadvar hopes the dragon takes them all to Sovngarde. From here, you can go inside with Ralof or Hadvar, depending on your choice. For now, we'll go with Hadvar, as the benefits from following him are better than Ralof's, but we'll see the other path later. Once inside, Hadvar will question aloud if that was a dragon and if it's really the bringer of the end times. Then he'll cut our bonds, and we'll be told to look around for armor and weapons. You'll find some iron swords and Imperial armor you can use. You'll find your inventory separated by category, which is helpful for organization's sake, and you'll see the Skyrim weight system in place as well. Overload yourself and you can't run or fast travel, but you can upgrade your weight limit via leveling up or through gear and perks we'll see later. Anyway, we'll equip the armor, a healing spell, and an iron sword before running into some stormcloaks. Hadvar tries to talk to them, but they become violent and we have to cut them down and loot their stuff for money we'll need later on. There's a lot of looting to be done in the game. It's also useful because they'll have a shield or two-handed weapon you can use if that's the build you're going for. We'll go over the builds later. We'll continue through the hold as the dragon causes the roof to collapse, and we'll have to go through an old storeroom filled with potions you can use to recover health, magicka, or stamina. Trust me, you'll want whatever you can get. We'll eventually make it down to the torture room, where we'll kill some stormcloaks and meet a torturer who doesn't know a dragon is attacking Helgen, but he did hear some odd noises coming from down the hall. Then we'll be introduced to the lock-picking skill, and you'll have a few locks you can pick from one of the prison cell doors, but be careful not to break your lockpicks because you only get a few until you get out of Helgen. We'll loot a body with a few magic pieces of gear, and from here we'll go around picking locks for skill points. Skill points are what dictate leveling up. Every time you level a skill up, you'll get a certain amount of experience points towards leveling up in general, which we'll go over more in a little bit. We'll continue down the hallway where we'll enter a cave system before running into more Stormcloak soldiers who we'll kill before moving on. This group gives you a bow and arrows, so by this point you have access to all of the basic builds of the game, those being one-handed shield tanking, two-handed smacking, archery, magic, and stealth. From here, it's up to you to decide how you want to employ these different setups, or if you want to create a combo of any number of them that better fits your playstyle. I usually prefer being a sneaky sniper, but we'll show more of that during another questline. We'll push further into the underground area where we'll run into giant spiders. These enemies always give me the creeps, just because spiders are already terrifying, but giant ones are pure evil. Hadvar comments on this by asking, what's next? Giant snakes? If Elder Scrolls 6 doesn't have giant snakes, I will be disappointed, but I don't even know if they want to make another Elder Scrolls game. They're probably going to remake Skyrim for the 10th time, but this time it's in 64K with full VR support or something like that. They've been milking this game for a decade, so why stop now? Anyway, we'll run into a sleeping bear afterwards where we can sneak past her or fight her. Because we're going with a one-handed shield combo, or tank build, we'll cut her up before moving on. We'll eventually make it out of the caverns, and we'll see the dragon fly overhead. Hadvar will say that they shouldn't stick around if he comes back. Then he'll direct us to Riverwood, where his uncle is the blacksmith. He says that he'd surely help us out. Then he thanks us for helping him survive the dragon assault, before we jump into the next main quest. Now that we're free, we've reached the free roam stage of the game, which is most of it. From here you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you want. That's one of the great things about the game. You always have options. We'll go over what you can do later, but for now we'll follow Hadvar to Riverwood. Along the way, he'll point us to Bleak Falls Barrow in the distance, saying it always used to give him nightmares as a boy. Dreams of Draugr creeping down the mountain to climb through his window at night. We'll learn what Draugr are soon enough. Along the path to Riverwood, you'll run into the Guardian Stones. Stones like these can be found around the world that grant unique bonuses to your character, whether it be unique abilities, stat upgrades, or passive increases to perk progression. These 3 stones give a passive boost of 20% to all skills within the Warrior, Mage, or Thief skill sections. This basically boils down to the red, blue, and green sections in the skill menu that we'll see later, as most builds in the game fall into at least one of these 3 categories. Since we're a tank build, we'll activate the Warrior Stone. It's a very helpful series of stones to find early game, as this bonus will last until you switch to another one, which can be anywhere from 5 minutes, up to completing everything in the game. It's up to you. Again, options are a big part of the game, and they do it well. As we get closer to Riverwood, Hadvar will mention that, as far as he's concerned, we've earned a pardon for helping him escape Helgen, but we should probably avoid Imperial soldiers for the time being. This doesn't really have any mechanical effect in the game, but it is a nice detail that they thought of having Hadvar mention this early in the game, given the situation. You'll also see that I'm picking flowers and mushrooms along the way, which will help us unlock different potions in the alchemy skill. We'll go over it later. For now, we're going to meet Hadvar's uncle, Alvor. He'll ask what happened to Hadvar, before Hadvar says we should head inside to talk about what happened. In the background, you can hear Hilda and Sven arguing about her seeing a dragon fly over the Barrow, which is the same one we saw earlier, but Sven thinks it's nonsense. Once we're inside, we'll meet Hadvar's aunt, Sigrid, who tells us to sit down, and she'll get us something to eat. Then we'll explain what happened at Helgen. Alvor questions if Hadvar is drunk after mentioning a dragon, but Hadvar continues and mentions that he needs to head to Solitude, one of the Hold capitals, to explain everything to his superiors. He was hoping Alvor could help us out with food, supplies, and a place to stay. Alvor is happy to help us, where you can grab a lot of random things from his inventory, but he tells us that we need to get word to Jarl Balgruuf in Whiterun, this Hold's capital, so he can send whatever soldiers he can to defend Riverwood from the dragon threat. From here, you can ask details for how to reach Whiterun, where Alvor will tell you how to get there, and just to keep going up until you reach Dragon's Reach, the Jarl's palace. You can also ask about the Jarl, whom Alvor describes as a good man who is overly cautious, having managed to stay out of the Civil War, but he's afraid it won't last. When asked if he supports the Empire, Alvor explains that Skyrim has always supported the Empire, but that doesn't mean he condones everything it's been doing lately, which we'll get to later. He also mentions that Nords have never been fair-weather friends, implying that they'll stay loyal even through the rough patches. When you ask about Elisif, Alvor explains that she was married to Jarl Torrig before he was murdered by Ulfric, making her the Jarl of Solitude in his stead. He also mentions that Ulfric killed him by shouting him to death, if you believe the stories. That's what started the Civil War. The Empire couldn't ignore an action like that once the Jarls started killing each other. We'll go over this more when we reach Solitude, and when we go over the Civil War questlines. If you ask about Riverwood, Alvor will give some history of the town, saying Gerder's family settled here first as woodcutters a few generations ago. She and Hod run the mill, and Alvor makes a decent living sharpening axes and fixing the sawmill. We'll see more of this when we go through the Stormcloak side of the Civil War questline. Our final question will be about Alvor's thoughts of the war. He mentions that people are rightly stirred up about the Thalmor being allowed to roam around arresting people just for worshipping Talos. Then he asks if questioning that was worth tearing Skyrim apart and destroying the Empire. In his mind, Ulfric will have a lot to answer for in the end. A follow-up question will appear, asking about the Thalmor arrests, where Alvor explains that a treaty was signed that ended the Great War, requiring the Empire to outlaw Talos worship. At first, they didn't pay much attention to it, with everyone having their own shrine to Talos. Then Ulfric and his Sons of Skyrim started agitating about it, and the Emperor had to crack down. Then he mentions people being dragged off in the middle of the night as one main cause of the war, which seems justifiable for aggravation from Skyrim's perspective, but we'll talk about that in more detail later on. This immediately tells you that the conflict with the Thalmor is partially over a religious difference of opinion, with the Thalmor persecuting those that believe Talos to be one of the divines, or gods, in the game, while the Empire let people worship whoever they wanted. The Thalmor are basically authoritarians who want to control what the Empire, and by extension Skyrim and its people, can believe in. We'll see more details about this throughout the game. The final thing you can ask Alvor about is if we can use his forge. He sees no harm in it, and he explains that the grindstone improves weapons, and the table improves armor. We'll go over this more when we get into smithing and how it works. When we exit the conversation, Alvor's daughter, Dorothy, will be excited by the talk of dragons, and ask Hadvar questions about it, before her mother tells her not to pester him. With this conversation over, Alvor will return to his smithing duties. We'll talk to Hadvar again, and ask him about the situation with Ulfric, and he mentions how they ambushed him, and he surrendered meekly according to him. Then he mocks his death or glory reputation given the situation. When you ask about the Stormcloaks, he details that Ulfric founded them a few years ago as a sort of private army to advance his ambitions. He always used the ban on the worship of Talos to stir people up against the Empire. Hadvar makes an interesting point, saying he never succeeded in getting much support before murdering High King Torrig. That got everyone's attention, including the Empire. When asked why Talos worship was banned, Hadvar explains that it wasn't such a big deal elsewhere in the Empire, but in Skyrim it's caused resentment since Talos is a native son of this land. He admits it wasn't the Empire's finest hour, but the Emperor didn't have a choice. He says if the Emperor didn't sign the treaty with the Thalmor, they would have destroyed the Empire, and where would Skyrim be then? Then he makes a great point that Ulfric's supporters conveniently forget that unless the Empire stands together, the Thalmor will destroy us all. This is something we'll see sprinkled throughout the game in little hints to how powerful the Thalmor were during the Great War. When we mentioned that the dragons were all dead long ago, Hadvar says he thought so too, but if the Stormcloaks somehow found one or woke it up, the war might be about to take an ugly turn. Hadvar admits that it's hard to believe that the dragon attack was a coincidence, since it's the first dragon anyone's seen for centuries, and it attacks just as Ulfric is about to be executed. In reality, this has to deal with the player being dragonborn, something we'll talk about soon. But from this situation, it does look like fate that Ulfric still lives. This is just the opening dialogue about what's happened, so prepare for a lot of talking in the game. With that out of the way, we'll head outside. We'll walk over and loot what armor and smithing supplies we can from Alvor's forge. We'll talk to him again, and we'll ask if he needs help around the forge. This takes you through the smithing tutorial, where you'll craft an iron dagger, upgrade it at the grindstone, then you'll tan some leather to craft a hide helmet, and improve it at the workbench. Afterward, he says to remember him when we're making Skyforged steel, something we'll see later. This takes you through everything you need to know to smith and upgrade your gear. You'll need ingots and leather or leather strips to craft certain types of armor, weapons, and other things. We'll go over that more later. For now, we need to offload some junk as we're overweight. Like most smiths, Alvor is also a vendor, who sells various smithing supplies you can purchase for upgrading items or increasing your smithing skill. He also serves as a barter option for equipment you've picked up in the world. The things you can sell to vendors is usually limited to stuff they deal with, so smiths deal with weapons and armor, alchemists deal with potions and ingredients, mages deal with magic items, spell tomes and soul gems, and so on. The catch is that vendors will sell high and buy low, so be careful how much you want to buy or sell to them, as you'll usually end up broke if you buy anything from them early on. You also have to worry about them running out of money if you sell too much to them. You can still dump items over to them, but once they run out, you won't get any gold in return. This is usually fixed by waiting 2 in-game days to reset their inventory and funds. There are perks in the speech skill tree that increase your favor with prices and allow you to invest in merchants so they have more gold on average, as well as allowing you to sell anything to anyone with the right perk. That last one is quite useful, as it gets annoying having to run to 5 different vendors just to sell off 5 different things that end up making you 20 gold. It's just a pain, unless you have a general merchant nearby who takes anything. Another minor thing is that most merchants are active between 8 AM and 8 PM in the game, so you'll find yourself using the wait function to interact with them during their active hours, and then waiting 2 days to reset their inventory while you just stare at them for 48 hours straight. That's gotta make them uneasy. Anyway, we'll sell most of our armor to Alvor, and we'll get a great view of Dragonborn Dan's masculine physique. Then we'll make and put on armor we made, as it is tougher than what we had before, including a new shield. Since we're going for a tank build with this character, we'll be going with heavy armor, as it provides higher defense, but it's also heavier to carry. An investment in your stamina stat will usually solve any weight issue you have, but you should still be careful with your weight. The more you carry, the more you can sell. The more you can sell, the less broke you'll be. We'll also be sure to upgrade our armor and weapons before heading on to Whiterun. From here, you can see the map of Skyrim is massive, with key locations popping up if you've been to them already. Then we'll hit the road in our iron-armored tank. One aspect of combat is favoriting weapons, abilities, and items, allowing you to quickly switch between weapons, spells, ammo types, potions, and so on. Makes everything a bit easier and faster for changing weapons mid-combat, or hitting a health potion when you really need it. Along the road, we'll run into some wolves. These enemies are fairly weak, so we'll use them to get our block skill up before killing them for leather. Block affects the usefulness of your shield and how cumbersome it can be. It also improves your shield bash, an ability that lets you smack your opponent in the face when your shield is up. Getting back to the wolves, you'll see that we contract rock joint, one of the diseases in the game. Diseases apply various negative effects to your character, like lowering your stats, slowing regeneration, decreasing skills, and so on. Some are even more cumbersome than that, but we'll get to those later. After getting enough skills up, we'll hear the shouting implying that we can level up, and we'll use our restoration magic to heal some of the damage the wolves did. Restoration is one of the few universal skills, as it heals you to varying degrees, so I'd recommend favoriting it and using it whenever you need some health, unless a potion would perform better, of course. Getting back to leveling up, opening your level up menu gives you 3 options for stats to upgrade: Magicka, Health, or Stamina. As we're a tank build, we'll want Health and Stamina most, so we'll bounce back and forth between the 2 stats as we level up. I usually do this for whatever build I'm going for, as extra health is useful when fighting stronger foes. but it's also good to have more stamina for power attacks and carry weight, or extra magicka for spellcasting. It's ultimately up to the player to decide how to split their stats, but that depends on what you want and what you need. You'll also get a skill point every time you level up, allowing you to unlock a perk from one of the skill trees you see. This will unlock new abilities for crafting, improve the usefulness of certain types of items, or will buff your abilities in some way. Use your skill points wisely, as you can't reset them without specific quest rewards or turning the skill legendary. This resets the skill from the maximum level, 100, back down to the starting point for your race's base stats, but you must reach 100 to do this, which takes a long time depending on the skill. Since we're a warrior, we'll unlock the first tier of the Juggernaut perk for extra heavy armor defense before moving on. We'll eventually make it to Whiterun, where a guard stops us at the gate. You can get in by reasoning with him using the Persuade option, telling him we have news of the dragon attack at Helgen. These reasoning sections require certain levels of speech skill to succeed. This first persuasion is a guaranteed success, but you also have other options just in case. Once inside, you can interact with any of the NPCs here to learn about the place, or get side quests for various items, skills, and so on. There's always stuff to do in the game, you just have to find it. Since we came during the night, most people are asleep in their homes until the morning. On the way up to Dragon's Reach, we'll interact with a shrine of Talos set up near a statue of him. Activating these shrines will cure most diseases, and will give you the blessing of the divine of the shrine. Be warned, as using different shrines do not stack, so whatever one you just used will replace the previous one you interacted with. They offer various benefits, from increased regeneration to increased skill progression, or they do something unique. The Blessing of Talos reduces your time between shouts, but since we don't have a shout yet, we don't get a buff. In any case, praise Talos for curing Rockjoint. We'll make it up to Dragon's Reach, where we can see the Jarl and his steward arguing, before we're confronted by Eyrie, who demands to know the meaning of our interruption. We'll explain that Alvor sent us, and that Riverwood is in danger. Eyrie will say that she is the housecarl, and as such, it is her job to deal with all dangers that threaten the Jarl or his people. We'll tell her that a dragon destroyed Helgen, and she'll tell you to approach the Jarl. When you talk to Balgruuf, he'll ask if we were at Helgen and if we saw the dragon. We can be serious, or we can mention that we had a great view while the Imperials were trying to cut off our head. We'll go serious and inform him that Helgen was destroyed, and the last thing we saw was the dragon heading this way. Eyrie will suggest that we send troops to Riverwood at once, as it's in the most immediate danger, but the Jarl's steward, Preventus, says that the Jarl of Falkreath, the hold to the south, will view this as a provocation, and assume Whiterun has joined Ulfric's side and is preparing to attack Falkreath. Their argument is cut short by Balgruuf stating that he will not stand idly by while a dragon burns his hold and slaughters his people. He then orders Eyrie to send a detachment to Riverwood at once. Preventus says he'll return to his duties, and the Jarl dryly tells him that would be best. Then the Jarl will address us directly, complimenting our initiative, and thanking us for our service to Whiterun. Then he'll give you a leveled item, as in an item appropriate for your character level, before the quest ends and he directs you to the next one. The Jarl mentions that there is another thing we could do for him that is suitable for someone of our particular talents. We're going to talk with his court wizard Farengar, as he's been looking into the dragon situation. Farengar mentions fetching an ancient stone tablet, and explains that he learned of such a tablet housed in Bleak Falls Barrow. This Dragonstone, as he calls it, contains a map of dragon burial sites. All we have to do is find the tablet and bring it back to him, and we're done. When you ask what he knows of the Barrow, he says it's an old tomb built by the ancient Nords, perhaps dating back to the Dragon War of old. He says it's near Riverwood, a miserable little village a few miles south of here. I take great offense to that, as I find Riverwood very relaxing and charming. You milk drinker. When asked how he knows that the tablet is there, he says he has reliable sources, but he must preserve his professional secrets. We'll meet one of those secrets when we return. Before we leave, the Jarl tells us that we should treat this as a priority, as they need anything they can to fight the dragons. We'll head back to Riverwood and enter the Riverwood Trader to meet Camilla and Lucan Valerius, having an argument. When you ask about what happened, Lucan will explain that he had a solid gold claw stolen from him, and he offers some coin if we bring it back. Then he says the thieves are at Bleak Falls Barrow. This is one of the first side quests you can do in the game that has a major objective to it. It also ties into the main quest, so you're going to get the Golden Claw anyway, so you may as well talk to them before you go to the Barrow. When you accept the quest, Camilla will sarcastically ask if this is the plan. Lucan will say it is, and she doesn't have to go now. She says that we need a guide, and Lucan relents, but he only allows her to take us to the edge of town. We'll follow Camilla as she points us towards the Barrow. If you follow her, she'll make a comment about the thieves hiding out there being mad, as those old crypts are filled with nothing but traps, trolls, and who knows what else. She has a few more lines of dialogue, but she glitches out here and gets stuck, where she won't continue her route. This is a problem with some of the AI in the game where their pathfinding can break, and some quests won't play out properly. A simple reload of a save or restarting has a high chance to fix it, but sometimes you're stuck for good unless you make a new character. Along the way, you can hear the kids Dorothy and Frodnar talking about sticking some branches and furs to their dog, and if they paint them white, they've just turned their dog Stump into a frostbite spider. Dorothy makes a good point, saying that it would get the dog killed, and Frodnar wonders if she could do better, so she suggests tag. You can also run into Embry flirting with Sigrid, who says that if Alvar hears of this, he'll stick his head in the forge. It's a nice little detail having all the NPCs have things they do outside of being quest givers or generic NPCs. Makes the world feel more alive and real. Anyway, with Camilla glitched, we'll begin our trek toward the Barrow. You can find a path just across the river that leads up toward a tower in the direction of it. Near it are some iron ore deposits, but we don't have a pickaxe, so we can't mine it yet. Just above the deposit is a group of bandits. You can kill them for some fodder gear, skills, and a few potions before heading to the Barrow itself. You'll also see how I got a unique animation when killing the last bandit. This will occasionally happen whenever the game determines you've done something cool, where it'll give you a special cutscene of some kind of action. The downsides to this are that many of them will kill enemies without giving you the skill increase you would have gotten by fighting them normally, or they may bug out and cause your character to fail at the action. This typically happens with archery or other ranged attacks, where you'll get a cutscene for a long-range shot, but you miss. You can try again, but sometimes it'll just give a cutscene leading to a miss, over and over again, because of something interfering with the kill going through. There are also times where you want to remain in control of your character, for instance, at low health, where a cutscene will play, but that leaves you open long enough to take fatal damage in some situations. We'll see examples of this later, as you can be ragdolled all over the place by certain enemies. Moving on, we'll make it to the Barrow, where we'll kill more bandits before heading inside. There will be some dead skeevers inside as well, basically giant rats, and a few more bandits we'll kill before we reach a bandit interacting with a lever. He'll activate it, but poison darts will be triggered, and they kill him. They won't kill us unless we're low health, or on a super high difficulty level, so we're fine. What the bandit failed to notice were the 3 stone symbols around the room. The 2 above the door show a snake and a whale, while the middle one has fallen to the ground. It is also a snake, and this puzzle is meant to show you how to do these Nordic picture combinations. The 3 pillars to our left are what we need to interact with. Rotating them until they match the order of what would have been on the wall will allow you to unlock the door without triggering the poison darts. Once through, you'll find a table with the thief book on it. Upon reading, or rather opening it, you'll have your pickpocket skill increased by 1 point. This lets you know that you don't have to get every single skill up one at a time on your own. There are other ways to do it. These options range from quest rewards to books, and specific people can train you in specific skills repeatedly up to 5 times per level. This means they'll train you 5 times before you must level up, and then they'll train you again, for a price each time. The price is usually dictated by the level you're training at. Going from 15 to 16 might cost you 200 gold. Going from 89 to 90 might cost you 8,000. The range at which they can train your skill up to is capped at specific points, but they can get you as far as 90, but by that point, you should be able to do the rest yourself. Anyway, we've leveled up after killing some skeevers, so we'll spend a skill point to unlock the ability to forge steel armor and weapons, the next tier up from iron equipment. Now we'll hear someone calling for help. We'll cut through a spider's web before encountering a giant wounded frostbite spider. After killing it, we'll talk to Arvel, who demands help to get out of here. When we mention the Golden Claw, he says he knows how it works and how the markings on it tie to the door in the hall ahead of us. We'll then cut him down and he'll run off, saying why should he share the treasure with anyone? He'll run right into the crypt where Draugr awaken, then he's killed by one. Draugr are basically undead Nords who reside in crypts like these. They'll scale up as you level up, but we'll see that as we progress. We'll loot Arvel, where we'll see the Golden Claw has 3 symbols on it, a bear, a bug, and an owl, and we'll pick up his journal along with everything else we can loot in the area, including a chest. Be sure to avoid the pressure plate on the floor just after the Draugr here, as these traps can do quite a lot of damage to a low-level character. We'll move on to encounter a Restless Draugr, a tier up from the regular undead we'll face. Then we'll run into a Slicer trap where axes swing back and forth to damage you as you go through them. These areas are actually a good farming spot for restoration since you can rest, replenishing all your magicka, and immediately get back to grinding healing. These traps will usually have a switch you can use to disable them, but not always. Just after them, we'll run into an urn trap, where the urn can be broken off a small rope, leading to it crashing into the goo on the floor, setting it on fire. This is good for fighting the Draugr, as they are weakest to fire, but it can hurt you too. We'll push past more Draugr until we reach a spot with an iron deposit and a pickaxe. Now that we have one, we'll mine the deposit and move on. Mining usually takes about 9 hits for a vein to deplete, so it doesn't take too long to get what you need and move on. Since we're nearly overweight, we'll eat a bunch of random potion ingredients we've acquired so far. This unlocks potions that each ingredient is tied to. This is something that is an awful choice in real life, as you shouldn't eat random things you find in the wild. Since there was a Tide Pod eating trend, I must have this PSA announcement about this stuff since humanity has shown it's not as intelligent as it should be. Anyway, we'll continue through more traps and Draugr until we reach a door with a claw insertion point and 3 symbols above it. Reading Arvel's journal hints towards the answer to this puzzle being right in your hands, which it is. You need to match the door with the order of the claw markings, going from top to bottom. After doing these doors enough, you can actually remember a numerical sequence for each door instead, so you don't have to look at the claw anymore. For instance, this number sequence is 222, since you need to rotate each section twice. Whether it was designed with that in mind or not, it's a handy trick on repeat playthroughs. Once the door is unlocked, we'll reach the main chamber. We'll run up to a clearing where a large stone wall appears along with a chest and a coffin. We'll go around to find some loot, as there's loot all over the place in this game. Then we'll walk up to the wall as it has glowing letters with shout sound effects to indicate a shout, Unrelenting Force. We'll learn this shout, and then the coffin will open and a Draugr overlord will climb out. He's tougher than the rest, but worse than the best. He'll have Farengar's Dragonstone on him, as well as a greatsword with an enchantment on it that deals bonus frost damage to health and stamina. The different magic types deal damage to different parts of your stats. Fire has a lingering burning effect, so it drains a little extra HP over time. Frost deals damage to your stamina bar, so this sword does 5 damage to your health and your stamina bar at the same time. The other damage type is Shock, which depletes magicka when hit by a spell or enchantment of that type. We'll go over the magic damage more when we reach another major questline later on. Anyway, we'll head up the stairway behind the word wall, and we'll find an exit leading outside. Most dungeons like this usually have a path or shortcut outside, so you don't have to head back through everything you just did. We'll fast travel back to Riverwood, where we'll give Lucan his claw back. He remembers it being bigger, but he gives us the gold after thanking us for what we did for both of them. Then we'll sell off most of our junk to him. It's a good idea to keep all magical items you pick up, as you can learn the magic tied to the item when you disenchant it. It destroys the item in the process, but you unlock the enchantment forever. We'll go over more enchanting mechanics later. When we return to Farengar, we'll see he's talking to a woman named Delphine about his research into the dragon situation. She mentions that her employers are anxious to have some tangible answers before Farengar notices us and is surprised we are alive. Then he compliments us as being a cut above the usual brutes he deals with. When you ask what is next, he says our job ends and his job begins. Then he says his associate will be pleased with our handiwork, as she discovered the Dragonstone's location by means she has not revealed yet. We'll see more of her later. Then we'll jump into the next quest. While talking to Farengar, Irileth will come up to us saying there was a dragon sighting nearby. Farengar is excited to hear this, but Irileth is serious, saying we may not be able to stop it if it attacks Whiterun. Then we'll meet with the Jarl and a guard in the upper level of Dragon's Reach. The guard will explain that the dragon came to the western watchtower from the south, and it was faster than anything he's ever seen. Then he says it wasn't attacking the tower, but was circling overhead when he left. He never ran so fast in his life, as he was sure it would come after him. Balgruuf will thank the guard for his work and tell him to head to the barracks for food and rest, as he's earned it. Then he'll tell Irileth to get some guards and head down to the tower, where she says she's mustering men near the main gate. Then the Jarl turns to us for help, asking us to accompany Irileth to the tower, as we have the most experience dealing with dragons, even from the little we did at Helgen. He also says he's not forgotten our aid to Farengar. He tells us that he has instructed Proventus Avenici that we can now purchase property in the city, and then gives us another leveled item. After our conversation ends, Farengar chimes in saying he would like to come along, as he wants to see the dragon. Balgruuf denies him, as he can't risk Irileth and Farengar. Balgruuf then clarifies to Irileth that this isn't a death or glory mission. He needs to know what we're dealing with. Then we'll prepare to head out to the watchtower. You don't have to follow Irileth, as she will make it to the tower one way or another, so you're free to do whatever you want before you get there. Before we leave, we'll craft some potions and disenchant some items. Crafting potions requires you to know at least 2 out of 3 ingredients of a recipe to craft the potion, or you can mix and match what you have to unlock new recipes. The only problem is that any new combo that doesn't offer anything new will become a failed potion, so the resources are essentially wasted. This is one reason why I don't really like this skill in particular, as you spend so much time researching combinations and randomly throwing them together that it takes you till the end of time to get this skill all the way up to 100, even more so than the others. Then we'll move on to disenchant some items. Like I said earlier, you must disenchant items to unlock their magic bonuses. Unlike alchemy, this skill goes up extremely quickly, and makes items more valuable once you enchant them, so it's a fast source of early levels and gold once you know how to optimize it. You need an item that can be enchanted that doesn't already have an enchantment on it, an enchantment itself, and a soul gem to enchant the item. The first two are easy to find, with the third being the main thing to worry about. Soul gems require you to capture the soul of whatever you fight out in the world to fill the soul gem. You can do this through a spell that traps the soul, or you can use weapons that have an enchantment that capture the soul of whatever you attack with the weapon. Once it's filled, the soul gem's strength will affect how strong the enchantments are. Petty soul gems are the weakest, and black soul gems are the strongest. Another thing to keep track of is what souls can be captured in each gem size. Petty gems usually only work for fauna like spiders, wolves, crabs, and other animals you'll find in the world. Once you get up to stronger creatures like special enemies, leveled Draugr, and even people, you'll need stronger soul gems. They also dictate the charge of an enchantment, as weapons use up their magic bonus over time. This requires you to recharge the weapon with other filled soul gems. The strength of the charge is also determined by the strength of the soul gem used to enchant the item. The stronger it is, the longer you can go without recharging the weapon's enchantment. An easy but expensive way to get soul gems involves purchasing them from the court wizard or other vendors around. The court wizard will usually sell several different types at once, so they will be your best bet for getting more, assuming you can afford them. If you play it right, you can create iron daggers for cheap and enchant them while also profiting off the venture every time. This gets your smithing, enchanting, and speech skill up all at once, leading to easy skills in important skill trees and easy money. Anyway, we'll enchant a ring for magicka regeneration purposes before going through our armor to do the same. We don't know many enchantments at this point, so we've got to work within our limits. Once we're done, we'll head outside to craft a few steel pieces of gear so we can improve our defenses. Then we'll head to the watchtower. You can meet Eyrie a little way from the tower itself, or you can run up to trigger the event if you don't care about her dialogue. Once we reach her, she'll say the dragon is not here now, but he's been here, as you can see from the burning wreckage of the tower. We'll spread out and look for survivors before we run into some hiding inside the tower. They tell us to get back, and that others were killed when they tried to run for it. Then the dragon will return, and we'll have our first dragon fight. Dragons will spend a lot of time in the air, so it's good to have some ranged attacks available. They'll also breathe fire or frost on you, so it's good to keep potions that help you resist those effects. The stronger dragons will do even more, but we'll touch on that later. They'll eventually land for a short time where you can smack them, but be careful, as their melee attacks can be quite damaging. Once we kill the dragon, we'll loot him to find some Whiterun Guard's belongings and several dragon bones and scales. These are used for high-tier armor sets and weapons much later into the game. Then the dragon's body will begin to disintegrate, and our character will absorb an energy from the dragon. We'll be told that we've absorbed the dragon's soul, and we've unlocked Unrelenting Force. You can now use Unrelenting Force, which is a shout that forces things away from you. A guard will come up to us, calling us Dragonborn, hence Dan's name. He'll explain that the Dragonborn is a warrior from the very oldest tales, who could slay a dragon and steal their power. All the Nords are curious or excited about it, but Eyrie is skeptical of this, but we've got to get back to Whiterun. You can't fast travel to Dragon's Reach like normal, and that's because of what happens when you enter the city. You'll hear a shout from the heavens crying, Dovahkiin! And we'll make it back up to the Jarl. We'll explain what happened at the Watchtower, and that we may be Dragonborn. Then the Jarl will explain that the sound we heard was the Greybeards summoning us. The Greybeards are the masters of the voice, the skill to use shouts, or Thu'um. Then we'll learn that the Greybeards haven't summoned anyone in centuries, at least not since Tiber Septim was Talos. Proventus will ask what this Nord nonsense has to do with us, and the Jarl's brother, Hrongar, will say that these are our sacred traditions that go back to the founding of the First Empire. Then Proventus will ask what the Greybeards want with us, but the Jarl says that's for the Greybeards to decide. Then he says that it's a great honor. He mentions that he made the pilgrimage to see them once, climbing the 7,000 steps up to High Hrothgar, a very peaceful place disconnected from the concerns of the world. The Jarl implies that the Greybeards don't get involved in the lesser affairs of the world, which is something we'll see when we meet them. If you talk directly to the Jarl, he'll thank you for defending his city and name us Thane of Whiterun. the highest honor within his power to grant, and he'll give us the Axe of Whiterun, another leveled item. He'll also assign Lydia as our personal housecarl, like Irileth. He'll notify the guards as well, since he wouldn't want them to think we were part of the common rabble. On the way out, we'll meet Lydia, the first NPC most fanboys simp over. Kinda ironic that they simp over a woman that's essentially given to us, but that's their prerogative. Anyway, she'll say that she's honored to serve us, and when we ask what a Thane is, she'll explain that it's a person of importance in the hold. She'll also mention that guards will look the other way if we tell them who we are. This helps you get out of trouble you may run into. When asked what a housecarl does, Lydia will explain that she's sworn to our service, and she'll guard us and all we own with her life. Lydia is also a follower, so you can have her follow you around and help you with quests and exploring the world. You can also use followers as pack mules, as they will be able to hold a significant number of items while keeping you from being encumbered. Before we head out for the Greybeards, we'll work on some skills before we go. We'll cast Soul Trap on Lydia to allow us some easy skills with the Soul Trap function. We'll need this since we don't have a weapon with the enchantment yet, and the spell is rather expensive in terms of magicka consumption. If you attack her too much, she'll leave your service, but you can always call her back. We'll also work on our smithing skill, as crafting iron daggers is one of the cheapest ways to get the smithing skill up quickly. You can also craft arrows of each type, but that requires firewood, and getting firewood takes longer than buying some leather strips. Usually. It's cheaper though, so it's worth considering if you're low on funds and want to make the most of your skills. Before we move on, we'll complete our steel set with a nice horned helmet. With that, we'll get into the next quest. Now we'll begin making our way to the Greybeards. First, we need to reach Ivarstead, a settlement at the base of the Throat of the World, the tallest and most central mountain in Skyrim. There are several ways to get there, but I usually go through the carriage system. It takes a few gold, but you can go to any hold capital if the capital you're at has someone with a carriage outside near the stables. Interestingly, the prices are not the same for each destination. It's noteworthy that all of the areas that do not have a carriage are much more expensive to reach, being 50 gold as opposed to 20. Which makes sense since there's no business there to begin with, so why go there? We'll be heading to Riften, as it is the closest hold capital to Ivarstead, and we'll need to return to Riften later. We'll also get flavor text from the carriage owner about Blackbriar Meadery, and its drink being a good choice after a long trek. We'll learn more about that later. Once we reach Riften, we'll discover it, then head west toward Ivarstead. I prefer this route over walking for several reasons. One is because there is a steep cliff that separates the borders between the Rift, the hold of Riften, and Eastmarch, the hold adjacent to it, that you'd naturally walk through to reach Ivarstead. Unless you know a few tricks to get up it, you'll have to go all the way around to Riften anyway to reach the upper level so you can reach Ivarstead itself. That's not the only path you can take by walking, but it is the most conventional. Another reason for coming this way by carriage is that it's faster, and we'll be returning to Riften later for another quest in the main story. It never hurts to unlock it along the way, so the trip back is easier later on. Anyway, we'll basically run across the hold as we work our way toward Ivarstead. Along the way, we'll capture some souls, get some skills up, and witness Bethesda AI. We'll send Lydia home since helpers can kill things that you could use for skill progression. We'll also discover Redwater Den, a place we'll visit in another playthrough. We'll eventually reach the small settlement of Ivarstead, where we'll come across a conversation between Gwilyn and Klimek about going up the 7,000 steps. Klimek says he's not ready to make the climb to High Hrothgar, as the path isn't safe. Gwilyn mentions the Greybeards needing supplies, and Klimek says he hasn't been let into their monastery. They'll go back to their business when we chat up Klimek to ask if there's anything he can tell us about High Hrothgar. He's been to the monastery many times, but never laid eyes on one of the Greybeards. Not that he cares to see them. Being masters of the Thu'um means they could kill him with a single word, but Klim doesn't want to provoke them as they seem peaceful. We'll also ask about the types of deliveries he makes to High Hrothgar, and he'll explain it's mostly food, like dried fish and salted meats, things that stay fresh for a long time. Then he says the Greybeards tend to not get out much, which can tell you a lot about their philosophy and activity in the world. When we ask what Klim gets in return for delivering supplies, he says they have an understanding. Then he says it wouldn't feel right to charge them for a bit of preserved food. Then he says his legs aren't what they used to be, and climbing the 7,000 steps takes its toll, which I imagine would, given what we'll see shortly. It is weird that he's not paid for his trouble, though. It's not like it's a stroll down the street. For Talow's sake, you're climbing a mountain. Anyway, we'll offer to deliver the supplies for him, and he'll instruct us to leave the items in an offering chest, and we're done. Then we'll ask for what to watch out for along the climb. Klim will mention possible wolf packs or strays, then warns the steps can be treacherous in these winter conditions. Then we'll head up and find a small emblem shrine with an inscription on it.
Before the birth of men, the dragons ruled all of Mundus. Their word was the voice, and they spoke only for true needs. For the voice could blot out the sky and flood the land.
It's a cool bit of lore that we'll see more of along the path to the Greybeard's penthouse. Further up, we'll meet Barknar praying at one of the shrines. We can talk to him, where he wonders what the Greybeard's calling for the Dovahkiin means. When asked why he's up here, he'll say that he likes to meditate on the emblems, and it doesn't hurt that he can bag some game along the way. It's like going to church and grabbing a meal on the way back. Then we'll read the next emblem.
Men were born and spread over the face of Mundus. The dragons presided over the crawling masses. Men were weak then, and had no voice.
We'll continue up the mountain until we reach the third emblem shrine.
The fledgling spirits of men were strong in the old times, unafraid to war with dragons and their voices, but the dragons only shouted them down and broke their hearts.
These little bits of lore we see while exploring the path make for a more dynamic approach to High Hrothgar than if they bunch the text together at the beginning or end, which is a nice pacing choice for new players who want to get absorbed into the game's world and narrative without getting bored or overwhelmed by a page of lore to read. I bring this up now because this game's pacing is a very mixed bag of good, meh, and bad at different times, as you'll see later on. Anyway, we'll continue and find another wanderer, Karita, admiring the next shrine emblem. We'll learn that she's excited about the call of the Dovahkiin as a pilgrim, and enjoys walking the steps every few years to meditate on the stones we read. Speaking of which...
Kine called to Parthenax, who pitied man. Together they taught men to use the voice. Then dragon war raged, dragon against tongue.
We'll continue until we run into a frost troll, something far more dangerous than what Klimek said we'd face. Either he's lucky or has a sick sense of humor. This troll could be a bit tough for a player who is only doing the main questline at this point, but we managed to cut the troll down and reach another shrine.
Man prevailed, shouting Alduin out of the world, proving for all that their voice too was strong, although their sacrifices were manyfold.
One cool thing about these shrines is that they often serve multiple purposes during a playthrough. They give a little bit of lore now to entice us before we are given more context for them later, either through dialogue or actually going back to witness the events they describe. It's a simple way to give players information that they'll learn more about later on, without repeating things in their entirety, which I think is a great balance of information and intrigue. It's not too vague, but also not overcomplicated with information we need to know now. Like I said, they play out as pieces to entice you, then you get the juicier specifics later when you need them and when you need more context. Anyway, we'll find the last 5 emblems.
With roaring tongues, the Sky Children conquer, founding the first empire with sword and voice, whilst the dragons withdrew from this world. The tongues at Red Mountain went away humbled. Jurgen Windcaller began his 7-year meditation to understand how strong voices could fail. Jurgen Windcaller chose silence and returned. The 17 disputants could not shout him down. Jurgen the Calm built his home on the throat of the world. For years all silent, the Greybeard spoke one name. Tiber Septim, stripling then, was summoned to Hrothgar. They blessed and named him Dovahkiin. The voice is worship. Follow the inner path. Speak only in true need.
And with that, we've reached High Hrothgar. We'll also have gained the Voice of the Sky passive effect for reading all of the emblems. This prevents animals from attacking or fleeing from us. Essentially, we read some history, and now the animals love us. It's a neat effect, but it's a weird one to give after reading all this lore of dragons, battles with powerful shouts, and then paths of wisdom. Might have made more sense to put a different effect after this last emblem, instead of this one. Perhaps something that affects shouts, like a reduced time limit on them for 24 hours, or something like that. Just feels a little odd to have an animal buff here. Maybe the developers were thinking people would re-climb the steps, and they wanted to make it easier on their second climb. Or maybe it's a way to explain how the 2 people we met made it up here without a scratch. Either way, I still think it's a bit odd, and doesn't mix with what we've been experiencing on our climb. Anyway, we'll drop the supplies in the offering chest, take some of their stuff since they don't need it, and we'll head inside. We'll meet Master Arngir, who asks us to shout at him to prove we're Dragonborn. Take that sentence out of context. We do so, and he says that he speaks for the Greybeards, and then asks why we've come here. We want to find out what it means to be Dragonborn, so Arngir says the Greybeards are here to guide us as one of dragon blood. We learn that we are not the first Dragonborn. There have been many since Akatosh, the Chief Divine, first bestowed that gift upon mortal kind. Whether we are the only one of this age, the Greybeards are not sure. We'll say that we're ready to learn, but Arngir questions if we have the discipline and temperament to follow the path we've begun walking. Arngir will then explain the lore and mechanics of our character being able to learn words of power through our dragon blood. Shouts are the language of dragons, and are made up of 3 words of power each. As we learn more of each shout, they will become more powerful. We'll then learn Ro, the second word in Unrelenting Force, from Master Einarth. Ro means balance, so combining it with Fus, force, lets us focus our shout more sharply. Einarth will put magic text on the ground, and we will learn Ro proper before Arngir says that learning a word of power is only the first step, as unlocking its meaning requires constant practice to use it, at least for those not of dragon blood. As Dragonborn, we can absorb a slain dragon's life force and knowledge directly, and Master Einarth allows us to tap into his understanding of Ro. We will then be put to the test by striking magical targets with the shout using both Fus and Ro. As you can see, the shout just takes a little longer to say before it activates, which makes sense since we literally have to say it for it to work. Then we'll move to the courtyard for our next lesson as we follow Master Bori. Bori the Glory will teach us a new shout, starting with Wold, Whirlwind, letting us learn the first word of a very useful shout, Whirlwind Sprint. We'll gain the knowledge of Wold from Bori the Gory, and we'll see a demonstration of the shout by Master Wulfgar as he has to pass through a gate. When he shouts, he lurches forward through the gate, and we'll do the same once it is our turn. As you can imagine, this is an extremely useful shout for travel and traversal, as it essentially acts as a boost in the direction you're facing, but we'll see that in action later. Afterwards, Arngir will say our quick mastery of a new Thu'um is astonishing, proving the stories they'd heard of a Dragonborn's abilities to be true. We'll say we don't know how we do it, and Arngir says that this gift was given by the gods for a reason, and it's up to us to figure out how best to use it. Now we are ready for our final trial. We are to retrieve the horn of Jurgen Windcaller, the Greybeard's founder, from the emblems we read. We'll find it in his ancient tomb of Ustengrav. Then we'll get into the next quest. Before we leave for Jurgen Windcaller's horn, we'll ask Arngir if the dragons returning has something to do with us. He'll say there's no doubt, as the Dragonborn's destiny is surely bound up with the return of dragons. Then we'll ask about Jurgen Windcaller. Arngir explains that he was a great war leader of the ancient Nords, and a master of the voice, or tongue. After the disaster at Red Mountain, where the Nord army was annihilated, he spent many years pondering the meaning of that defeat. He came to realize that the gods had punished the Nords for their arrogant and blasphemous misuse of the voice. Jurgen was the first to understand that the voice should be used solely for the glory and worship of the gods, not the glory of men. His mastery of the voice eventually overcame all opposition, and the way of the voice was born. The situation is interpretable in many ways, so I won't go into every possible viewpoint on this, but I will touch on the Greybeard's perspective on things later. Anyway, when we ask what the way of the voice is, Arngir explains that the voice was a gift of the goddess Kinnereth at the dawn of time. She gave mortals the ability to speak as dragons do, although the gift has been misused. The only true use of the voice is for worship and glory of the gods. True mastery of the voice can only be achieved when our spirit is in harmony with our actions. In the contemplation of the sky, Kinnereth's domain, and the practice of the voice, the Greybeards strive to achieve this balance. We'll say that we will try to follow the way of the voice, and Arngir commends us for this, but tells us to remember that the dragon blood is a gift, and we should not try to deny it. Our destiny requires us to use the voice, so why else would we have this gift? Again, we'll go over the Greybeard's philosophy later. Before we head off to find Jurgen's blower, we've got a few things to do. We'll return to Klemek and Iverstead first. We'll run into cultists there that ask if we're the Dragonborn. We'll say we are, and they call us a deceiver as the true Dragonborn comes, and we are but a shadow. When Lord Mirak appears, all shall bear witness. Then the cultists attack us. We'll kill them both and find a note on one of them that details their orders. We'll read this later, as this is the introduction to one of the DLCs that I'll be showing. More details on that at a later time. Anyway, we'll talk to Klemek in the morning, and he says that it's much appreciated, and we'll get 500 gold from him. Decent payday. We'll sell off the cultist gear since we won't need it for this run, and we'll work on some enchanting before we head out. We'll take a carriage to Morthal, the capital of Hjalmarch, and then head to Dawnstar to boost our skills more. We'll do this by looting an invisible chest hidden near the mine that is filled with a large assortment of random goodies we can use for skill increases, enchantments, better gear, or as an extra source of gold once we sell it all. While we're dealing with the bounty of the Invisi-chest, we'll be met by a courier. We'll get a letter from an unnamed friend of ours that points toward Bone-strewn Crest to find a mysterious power that only a Dragonborn can wield. This will happen throughout the game as a means to point us toward new shouts. This is pretty handy, and we'll meet the unnamed friend soon enough. After a long series of buying, selling, smithing, and enchanting, we'll upgrade our steel set to a Dwemer one. This is the next tier up from steel, requiring dwarven smithing and ingots to produce the armor and weapons for this set. It's like going from silver to gold, at least in terms of looks. With our gear upgraded, we'll go for the horn. We'll make it to Ustengrav, where we'll see several bandits slain by necromancers. We'll cut through them and loot the cave as we progress, until we reach Draugr. We'll fight through them and skeletons as we explore a large underground cavern. At the bottom, we'll find the first word of Become Ethereal, Fade, allowing us to change our form to one that cannot harm or be harmed. This is useful to give yourself a break during combat, or to give yourself invulnerability if you need to make a risky jump that might kill you. Personally, I like using it to jump from crazy high places. It's a good safety net. Anyway, we'll make it to a puzzle where we'll need to sprint past 3 glowing stones and then whirlwind sprint past the 3 doors they open. These kinds of puzzles can get a little annoying because of hitboxes not matching properly, getting the player stuck and causing them to fail, but they are usually easy to set up again, so it's only a minor issue. We'll make it through and fight past Arachnus Deathicises before we reach a final room where statues rise out of the water for some reason. We'll reach the altar to find a note where the horn should be that says a friend needs to speak with us urgently. We need to rent the attic room at the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood to meet them. We'll head to the inn and ask for the attic room, but Delphine says they don't have one, so we can use the one on the left. We'll pay the 10 gold for it and wait inside until Delphine walks in to say that we're the Dragonborn that she's heard about, and then gives us the horn before starting the next quest. The quests overlap, so you can have both the horn quest and its follow-up being tracked at once, which is a little odd, but we're basically done with the Greybeards for a little bit after returning the horn, so it doesn't really affect anything. Anyway, the following quest begins with us being asked to follow Delphine. She will lead us into the main bedroom of the inn, and opens a secret passage behind the false back of a dresser. Then we'll talk, where we'll ask if she's the one who took the horn. She'll ask if we're surprised, as she's getting pretty good at her harmless innkeeper act. We'll ask about all the cloak and dagger, and Delphine will say we can't be too careful with Thalmor spies everywhere. We'll ask what she wants with us, and we learn that she needed to make sure this wasn't a Thalmor trap. She goes on to say that she is trying to help us if we'll hear her out. When we talk to her, she'll explain that she's a part of a group who has been looking for someone like us, and that the Dragonborn is the ultimate Dragonslayer. Dragonborn can devour a dragon's soul, killing it permanently. She'll mention that we'll have a chance to prove if we really can devour a dragon's soul soon, then goes on to say that the dragons aren't just coming back, they're coming back to life. They weren't gone for all these years, they were killed off centuries ago by Delphine's predecessors. Now something is bringing them back, and she needs our help to stop it. When we question if she's sure dragons are resurrecting, she's visited their ancient burial mounds, and found them empty. She knows where the next one will come back, somehow, and we're going to go there and kill that dragon. If we succeed, she'll tell us anything we want to know. We'll be directed to Kynesgrove, and Delphine will get into her traveling gear. On the way out, she'll leave the inn under Orgnar's care until she returns. We won't see this because we're a greedy player that must loot everything, so we do, and pick up a blade sword, a katana-style weapon that her organization, also named the Blades, used to kill dragons. We'll enchant it with shock damage, as the shock effect adds special damage and saps magicka from the victim, which is helpful against magical enemies, but it can also help with bonus damage to dragons. We'll also enchant some of our Dwemer set to afford some extra magic regeneration and health. When we head outside, Delphine can lead us to Kynesgrove, or we can meet her there. I usually choose to meet her there just because it's faster, but if you want a more immersive experience, you can follow her. Before we catch up with Del, we'll return to the Greybeards to give them Jurgen's horn. Upon doing so, we will be formally recognized as Dragonborn, and we will learn the final word of unrelenting force, Da, meaning push. Now we have the meme of Fusro Da, that we can yell at anyone we want. After we finish the shout, the Greybeards will speak to us through the voice. Their speech roughly translates to, "Long in sorrow has waded the storm crown, with no worthy head to rest on. By our voice we give it now to you, Dragonborn. By the power of Kine, by the power of Shore, and by the power of Atmora of old, you have become now Ysmir, Dragon of the North. Remember these words." After the old men shout at us, we are free to talk to the Greybeards about anything, and live in High Hrothgar if we so choose, but we've got dragons to slay. We'll regroup with Del just before Kynesgrove, where we'll run into someone fleeing the area as a dragon is attacking. She directs us to the old dragon burial ground, so it seems Del was right to bring us here. We'll head up to the mound and we'll find the dragon we met at the beginning of the game, Alduin, who resurrects the dragon within the mound. We'll fight Saloknir, using our shock blade to defeat it pretty quickly. With the dragon dead and our abilities proven without question, Del opens up to us. We learn that she doesn't know why the dragons are coming back, and that she is one of the last members of the Blades. Long ago, the Blades were Dragonslayers who served the Dragonborn. For the last 200 years, since the last Dragonborn Emperor, the Blades have been searching for a purpose. With the dragons returning, their purpose is clear. When we ask for more details of the Blades, we learn that they were once known across Tamriel as the protectors of the Septim Emperors, but those days are long gone. The Blades have been searching for the next Dragonborn to guide and guard until she found us. Then we'll learn our next move is to find out who's behind this. We'll start with the Thalmor, as they are the best lead. If they aren't involved, they'll at least know something. When we ask why she thinks it's the Thalmor, she doesn't have anything solid, but her gut tells her it can't be anybody else. As we'll see later, her gut isn't what it used to be. She goes on to say that with the Empire's capture of Ulfric, the Civil War was basically over. Then the dragons attack, Ulfric escapes, and the war is back on. Skyrim is in a civil war again, and the Empire is weakened by dragons running amok. Who benefits from this more than the Thalmor? A fair point, but we'll learn more later. We'll also learn that the Blades helped the Empire in the Great War against the Thalmor, and they thought themselves a match for them, but they were wrong. With everything we learn about the Great War in this game, the Thalmor were a major power and quite threatening. We'll then start concocting a plan to get into the Thalmor Embassy, their center of operations in Skyrim, to learn what they know of the dragon attacks. The problem is that it's extremely secure, so we'll need to find a way in. Del will work on a way in, and then the next quest begins. We'll regroup with Del in Riverwood, where she explains that she has a plan to get us in, but she can't come with us. The Thalmor ambassador, Elenwyn, throws parties where the rich and connected cozy up to the Thalmor. Del can get us inside during one of the parties, and once we're in, we'll get away and find Elenwyn's secret files. Del has a contact inside the embassy, Malborn, who will meet at Solitude to progress the quest and plan. When we ask about Malborn, Del says he hates the Thalmor almost as much as she does, and that we can trust him. The Thalmor wiped out his family back in Valenwood during one of their purges that we never hear about, implying the level of information control the Thalmor have going on. We'll meet Malborn in a moment, but let's reach Solitude. Once we enter the city, we'll see a child asking about her uncle Rogvir, then she's told to go home and stay there. Then we'll have the townsfolk gathering around to witness Rogvir's execution. Here we get more context to the beginning of the Civil War that we'll delve into later. Aldous says that Rogvir helped Ulfric escape the city after Ulfric murdered High King Torrig, with Rogvir opening the gate for Ulfric. Rogvir pushes back, saying there was no murder, as Ulfric challenged and beat the High King in fair combat, as is the ancient custom of Skyrim and Nords. This, along with some other details we'll learn, will help paint an accurate picture of what happened with Ulfric and Torrig that started the Civil War in the first place, but we'll deal with that later. Once Rogvir is ready, he says he's going to Sovngarde, the Nord afterlife of mead and song and all that good stuff. After his decapitation, we'll loot his body to grab the Amulet of Talos, a necklace that reduces shout cooldowns by 20%, which is helpful because of all the shouting we'll be doing. It's not like he needs it anyway. Moving on, we'll head into the Winking Skeever, a charming name to be sure, where we'll sit with Malborn and discuss the operation. He clearly doesn't think we're up to the task, then explains that he can smuggle equipment into the embassy like armor, weapons, etc. This is where you'll have to consider what to bring in, as whatever you don't include will be left back at Riverwood, so pick things that'll help you survive magic combat or aid in sneaking around. Once all our gear is prepped, and we're in our Nordic undies, we'll meet Delphine at the stables outside the city. She'll give us a nice set of clothes to look the part, and the invitation we need. She'll give another warning to make sure we have all our loot set up for this venture. Then we'll load up in the carriage and head to the embassy. It's located north of Solitude, amongst the snowy mountaintops of Skyrim. A rather odd place to set up shop, but it's probably secure from any threats, Nords or otherwise. We'll meet another patron of the party, Razalan, who mentions his proclivity for drinking at these parties. He'll pop up again in a moment. We'll show the invitation to the guard, and we'll be let inside. Once in, we'll meet Elenwyn proper, who introduces herself, but begins to ask about us. We tell her we're Dragonborn Dan, the totally unassuming guest of the party, and she'll begin to ask more about us before Malborn interrupts. He saves us by feigning that they've run out of the Alto wine and wants permission to open the Arenthia Red. Elenwyn scolds him for the interruptions, and says we'll get acquainted later. We'll talk with Malborn, and he'll tell us to distract the guards, and then he'll lead us back through the door behind him, and we'll begin our search for paperwork. We'll get a drink and talk to Razalan again. He said he's here for business, and we'll offer him a drink. Then we ask a favor, and we'll get him to distract the guards as he tactlessly insults Elenwen at her own party. During this, Malborn will sneak us away. We'll get our gear after following Malborn. Savani, a Khajiit in the kitchen, says it's against the rules to have guests back here, and Malborn fires back that it's also against the rules to eat moon sugar, an illegal drug. She shuts up after that, and we'll grab our gear and head into the next area. We're not built for stealth, so this doesn't go as sneakily as most of us probably wanted, but it is doable if your build supports it. Anyway, we'll fight through Thalmor wizards and guards, always looting what we can along the way, until we make it outside and into a courtyard, where we'll deal with more golden elves. Then we'll enter another building and find a Nord, Gisser, that we'll kill. If we stealth through and avoid killing him, we'll learn that he is a beggar that is an informant for the Thalmor. He would pop up later along the main quest line, but he's usually killed by yours truly during the search for paperwork. We'll also kill Rulindil, the chief of security here, that can also pop up later, and then we'll get to searching. We'll eventually find Elenwen's office, where we'll find a few documents. The first is for the dragon investigation, which reveals they captured someone who should know something about the dragon resurrections, but isn't talking. They've been torturing him and await him breaking. Then we'll look through a dossier on Delphine. It describes her as a very capable warrior and a major threat to the Thalmor during the war, and since its end, she has evaded capture, which frustrates the elves to no end. The next document is a dossier on Ulfric. He is described as the Jarl of Windhelm, leader of the rebellion, and a veteran of the Imperial Legion. It mentions that Ulfric was captured and interrogated during the war, and it hints to the idea that Ulfric was working with the Thalmor at some point or became a sleeper agent. It's not too specific, but they do mention that the asset should be considered dormant, so I'd say that's enough reason to believe something is up with Ulfric's mental state. They also make a note that they were planning to intervene at Helgen to allow Ulfric to escape, as his death would hinder their position in Skyrim. But they do note that the coincidental intervention of the dragon is still under scrutiny. They do state that a Stormcloak victory is also to be avoided, so they're essentially playing both sides to weaken them both as much as possible. After all, why stop your enemies from doing something stupid? We'll move on to reach the dungeon, where we'll kill a few guards and then find a chest. It has another dossier on someone named Esbern. Once we interact with it, the quest will progress, and we'll learn that Esbern was one of the Blade's lore masters prior to the war. It's noted that he is a priority target for the Thalmor, as he was the Blade's expert in dragon lore, and he may be hiding in Riften. Remember why we visited that place? When we finish reading, we'll find Malborn upstairs with 2 Thalmor soldiers. They threaten to kill him if we don't surrender, but then we save our boy and grab a key to get out. Malborn says the Thalmor will be hunting him for the rest of his life, so he hopes this was worth it. Then we'll free Etienne Rarnus, the prisoner they mentioned earlier. They grabbed him in Riften and asked him the same questions over and over. He'll pop up later once we get to one of the major quest lines. Anyway, we'll head through a tunnel and run into a frost troll, explaining where the other prisoners ended up, and we'll slay it before it kills either of our friends. We'll find an unusual gem near the corpse of a novice conjurer, but we'll deal with what that does later on. Once outside, we'll head back to Delphine to regroup, debrief, and get our junk back, as we see Malborn run off to better places, until an Argonian runs up to him and kills him in a few quick punches. If he was that weak, he wouldn't have made it far anyway. He'd go over to Windhelm and hide there until he could escape to Morrowind later, but he's weaker than a broken bone, so rest in peace. We'll follow Etienne as he runs before he just stops near an underpass beneath Solitude. He just stands there, menacingly. Guess we'll move on. Once we regroup with Delphine, we'll inform her of Esbern, and she thought the Thalmor got him years ago. Then we ask what the Thalmor would want with Esbern, which is stupid to ask since we just read a dossier on why they wanted him. I guess it's for the players invested enough to listen, but not enough to read. Then we'll tell her he's supposedly in Riften, and she mentions the Ratway, as that's where she'd go. Del will tell us to talk to Brynjolf in Riften, as he's well connected. More on that later. And when we find Esbern, we'll need to ask him where he was on the 30th of Frostfall, as he's more paranoid than Delphine is. She says he'll know what that means, and the quest ends there. Before we head over to Riften, we'll retrieve our gear and try to use up the massive amount of resources we now hold. After taking care of it, we'll head to Riften. We'll be told to pay the visitor's tax before we call it out as a shakedown, then we'll head inside. This is a nice bit of foreshadowing to display how corrupt Riften is, as we'll see later. Once inside, we'll find Brynjolf, who insults us by saying we've never done an honest day's work for the gold we carry. We'll mention we're looking for an old guy hiding in town, but first we'll need to help Brynjolf with business. We'll try to persuade him that dragons are bad for business, but he shakes it off, saying passing on a golden opportunity is worse, which is total skeever droppings of a point, but will help. When we ask for details, he needs us to steal a ring and place it into someone else's pocket. We'll go over the details of this quest later as it begins a major quest line. Since we aren't built for sneaking or pickpocketing, this goes poorly. This results in the guards attacking us. This also shows that the guards can bug out during this important quest since they will attack you without offering a chance of surrender, even though they are supposed to accept a surrender once our weapons are lowered. We only accrued a 25 gold bounty, but for some reason the Rifted Guards really hate us for what we attempted, so we'll run away to lose them. Anyway, we'll return to Brynjolf, whose quest has just reset itself without us doing anything. We'll successfully put the ring in the pocket this time, and then we'll ask Brynjolf about Esbern again. He'll direct us to the Ratway Warrens, and mentions that Esbern's paying good coin for nobody to know about his hiding place, which is completely undermined by the fact that doing petty theft and framing someone was enough to get the information. Small price to pay to get that information. Maybe Esbern's not paying them a lot. We'll be led into the lower level of the city, where we'll enter the sewers-like area of the Ratway. We'll kill a few hobos and vagabonds on the way to Esbern, until we find him behind an excessively locked door. He'll be suspicious of us at first, but we'll mention Delphine keeping up the fight before he takes the time to open his excessively locked door. When opened, we'll talk with the old man, and he'll say that Delphine should have realized it's hopeless by now, and that he tried to tell her years ago. When we inquire what he means, he explains that Alduin's return is part of a prophecy, as Alduin is the dragon from the dawn of time who devours the souls of the dead. No one can escape his hunger, either here or in the afterlife. He will devour all things, and the world will end. Nothing can stop him, except a dragonborn. When we mention our dragon blood, he regains hope and says we must head back to Delphine before he packs up as we move to the next quest. After Esbern covers his tracks, we'll have to fight the Thalmor on the way out of the Ratway Warrens. We'll need to lead Esbern to Delphine in Riverwood, but we only really need to lead him through the Ratway safely, and then we can warp over. Once there, we'll see their reunion, and we'll discuss our next move. Esbern will direct us to locate Skyhaven Temple. It holds Alduin's Wall, which is a stone wall where all the Akaviri's accumulated dragon lore is, as well as our best bet to find a way to defeat Alduin. Delphine knows where to look, so we're heading to Karthspire in the Reach, the major hold on Skyrim's western edge. As we leave, we'll hear Delphine leave the inn to Orgnar, as she may never be coming back. It's not a major point, but it is a great detail to use Delphine's quest participation for that extra bit of world building to make the world feel richer and more alive than just textures and code. Before we head to Karthspire, we're going to do some farming for iron and other resources to boost our skills. This involves raiding a mine near Riverwood, and then boosting enchanted iron dagger sales for a bit to build up the funds to upgrade our armor to the next set. We'll also return to Helgen to find it inhabited by bandits after its destruction. Again, the little details fill out the world building. After enough smithing and selling, we'll completely upgrade to an orcish set of armor and weapons. I dare say we look cool, but just wait for later sets. Now that we're full of orcish hate and bloodlust, let's go for Karthspire. The Reach is one of the most difficult areas in Skyrim, not just because the Forsworn, the native hooligans we'll learn more of later, are incredibly damaging, but the geography of the region is also an issue. The region is extremely mountainous, so much of our time will be spent finding ways up and down steep hills and cliffs, as the Forsworn attack us. We'll get more details on the Forsworn later, but for now, I'll simply say that they remain a threat throughout the game, no matter what level you are. This is mainly due to the extra damage bonus they have against others, which can be useful if you're looking to farm defensive stats and skills, or incredibly deadly if you aren't ready for it. Anyway, we'll see a few dragons on our way to Karthspire, something that is useful for farming dragon souls, but can also be a problem if you're out doing your own thing and you're dealing with dragons spawning more often than you'd like. This can be particularly annoying when interacting with NPCs, as the higher level dragons can roast people quickly, leading to a dead NPC and a loss of content most of the time. Now, you can reload and try again, but some situations become a chore when it becomes babysitting the AI so they don't die. Moving on, we'll sneak into Karthspire from the backside before entering it to find a series of Akaviri puzzles we'll need to solve. The first is a bridge connected to 3 pillars. We'll turn them all to the Dragonborn symbol, and the bridge ahead will lower. Afterwards, we'll run into a flaming panel puzzle. Simply follow the path with the Dragonborn symbols to pull the lever to unlock the way forward and disable the pressure plates. There's a perk in the sneak tree that disables pressure plate activation, which is quite helpful here, but you can always book it past them as this area isn't particularly deadly. Anyway, we'll reach the entrance to Skyhaven Temple. We'll need to activate the blood seal, so we'll spill our blood to open the doorway inside. Delphine says we should have the honor to be the first to enter the temple. We'll walk in and find Alduin's Wall. Esbern and Delphine will look around the place, with Esbern admiring the Akaviri's partaking of the Nordic stonework style before he reaches the wall. Esbern will inspect the wall and explain the images we can see on it. From left to right, it begins with the beginning of time, when Alduin and the dragon cult ruled Skyrim. Then we see the humans rebelling and Alduin's defeat. He falls from the sky as the Nord Masters of the Voice bring him down. Delphine will ask if we see a way to defeat him, and Esbern explains that we must be patient, as the Akaviri were not a straightforward people. Everything is couched in allegory and mythic symbolism. Esbern will move on, showing a shout was used to defeat Alduin, something specific to dragons or Alduin himself. Delphine will ask if we know of a shout that can knock a dragon out of the sky. We don't, but mention that the Greybeards might know. Delphine says she had hoped to avoid involving them, and then says they're a little cult and that they likely wouldn't help Esbern or her if they came calling. Then she'll mention that the two of them will stay at the temple and look around, as this is the perfect base for the blades. Then the next quest begins. Before we leave, Esbern will explain the prophecy that showed the Akaviri kneeling as the last Dragonborn faces Alduin at the end of time. He says Delphine could learn something from this, but she stands silent. Figured she'd care more about deciphering this for the good of all our souls and the world, but she's too busy hating old men on mountains. Before we leave, we'll grab the Blades armor set and Dragon Bane, a sword that does extra damage to dragons and extra shock to everything else. We'll be replacing our Orcish set of gear as the Blade set is slightly better, then we'll head out. We'll return to High Hrothgar and talk to Arngir about the shout used to defeat Alduin. He immediately becomes defensive and asks who we learned of that from and who we've been talking to. We'll mention Alduin's wall, and Arnie concludes it's the Blades. He describes them as meddling in matters they barely understand, and that their reckless arrogance knows no bounds. He believes that the Blades have always sought to turn the Dragonborn from the path of wisdom. He asks if we would simply be a tool in the hands of the Blades, to be used for their own purposes, and we'll say we just want to defeat Alduin. Arnie points out that what we want is irrelevant, and that this shout was used once before, and yet here we are again. Then he suggests that maybe we weren't meant to defeat Alduin. He says those who overthrew him in ancient times only postponed the day of reckoning, and did not stop it. Then Arnie resigns himself to the world ending, and says to let it be reborn. When we ask if they still won't help us, Arnie confirms they won't until we return to the path of wisdom. Then the world will shake as Einarth speaks to Arnie. Arnie asks for forgiveness as he allowed his emotions to cloud his judgment. Then he says the decision to help you is not his to make. We'll ask if he can teach us the shout we requested, but Arnie says he can't teach it because this shout, called Dragon Rend, is unknown to the Greybeards. They do not regret the loss of the shout, as it holds no place within the Way of the Voice. We'll ask what's so bad about Dragon Rend, and Arnie explains that it was created by those who had lived under the unimaginable cruelty of Alduin's dragon cult. Their lives were so consumed with hatred for dragons that they poured it into this shout. He goes on to say that when we learn a shout, we take it into our very being. In a sense, we become the shout. In order to learn Dragon Rend, we'll be taking this evil, or rather hatred, into ourselves. We'll say that we thought the Greybeards knew all the words of power, but Arnie explains that the knowledge of Dragon Rend was lost in the time before history began. Perhaps only its creators ever knew it, but Arnie isn't the one to speak of it to us. We'll say if the shout is lost, how can we defeat Alduin? Arnie says only Paarthurnax, the master of the Greybeards' order, can answer that question. When we say we need to speak to Paarthurnax, Arnie says we weren't and still aren't ready to do so, but thanks to the Blades, we have questions only he can answer. When we ask why we haven't met him yet, Arnie will say that Paarthurnax lives in seclusion on the peak of the mountain. He rarely speaks to the Greybeards, and never to outsiders. Being allowed to see him is a great privilege. We'll ask about how to reach the top of the mountain, and Arnie says only those whose voice is strong can find the path. Then he'll say the Greybeards will teach us a shout to open the way to Paarthurnax. We'll relocate to the foot of a stairway covered in mist, where we'll learn all 3 words of power for clear skies. This is the final gift from the Greybeards, and Arnie will explain that this shout will clear the mist in our way, but only for a time. The path is dangerous, and if we remain focused, we will reach our goal. We'll equip clear skies and shout at the mist. This begins a long sequence of running up to a cloud, yelling at it, then repeating the process until we reach the peak of the mountain. This isn't the only way to reach the peak, as you can run through the mist. However, it drains your health, so prepared healers or the incredibly hefty potion masters will be able to make it through the mist alive. Or you can spam the jump button to reach the top. My brother spent several hours spamming the button to reach the peak of the Throat of the World, and by Ysmir he did it. It was impressive, and a challenge worth overcoming, until I did the quest later and just yelled my way to the top in a few minutes. Still, sometimes the drastically needless challenges can be rewarding. Anyway, we'll reach the peak to find a dragon waiting for us. This is Paarthurnax. He greets us and introduces himself, asking what brings us to his mountain. We think he already knows, and he explains that he does, but he sought to prolong our conversation. When we ask about Dragonrend, he asks for patience, as there are formalities which must be observed at the meeting of two of the Dove. Then he says the Elder speaks first, and he shouts fire at the word wall. We'll learn the word of power fire, for fire breath, and he'll give us the knowledge of the shout to learn it. Then we'll use it on Paarthurnax to greet him as Dova. Once toasted, he says the dragon blood runs strong within us, and mentions that it has been a while since he had the pleasure to speak with one of his own kind. We'll talk to him some more as he flies up, and then he drifts off into the sky. Nice and glitchy, even after a decade. Anyway, he knows we come seeking our weapon against Alduin. When asked how he knew this, he'll say what else would we seek. He does not know the shout and says it cannot be known to him. He'll explain that it was created by mortals against the dragons, and that the dragons' minds can't even comprehend its concepts. When asked how we can learn Dragonrend, he'll ask why we want to learn it. We'll say that we like this world, and don't want it to end, which Paarthurnax says is as good a reason as any. There are many who feel as we do, although not all. Some would say that all things must end, so the next thing can come to pass, referencing what Arngir said earlier. Then he asks if we would stop the next world from being born. We say the next world will have to take care of itself, a fair answer in Paarthurnax's eyes, but we may only balance the forces that work to quicken the end of this world. He says even those who ride the currents of time cannot see past the end. Getting heavy stuff here. Paarthurnax continues, saying that those who try to hasten the end may delay it, and the same goes in reverse. Then he says that we have indulged his weakness for speech long enough, and he will answer our question, but first one of his own. He asks why he lives here at the peak of this mountain. We'll half-heartedly say it's because dragons like mountains, before he says this is true. However, few remember that this was the very spot where Alduin was defeated by the ancient tongues. Perhaps he is the only one who remembers how he was defeated. We expect Dragonrend to be the thing used to defeat Alduin, but Paarthurnax gives a mixed answer, saying he was not truly defeated. If he was, we wouldn't be here seeking to defeat him. The Nords of old used the shout to cripple Alduin, but it wasn't enough. They used an Elder Scroll to cast him adrift on the currents of time. When we ask if the Nords sent Alduin forward in time, Paarthurnax says it wasn't intentional, as they probably hoped he would be gone forever. But Paarthurnax knew better. Time flows ever onward, and he would surface one day. This is why Paarthurnax has lived here for thousands of years. He knew where Alduin would emerge, but not when. Then we ask what an Elder Scroll is, and Paarthurnax has trouble putting it into words we could understand. He describes the scrolls as artifacts from outside time. They do not exist, but have always existed. They are fragments of creation. They have often been used for prophecy, and our prophecy comes from an Elder Scroll, but that is only a small part of their power. When we ask how any of this helps us, he'll say time was shattered here because of what the ancient Nords did to Alduin. If we brought that Elder Scroll back to the Time Wound, we may be able to cast ourselves back to the other end of the break to learn Dragonrend from those who created it. Then the quest ends. Love how it always ends in the middle of a conversation. We'll ask Paarthurnax if he knows where we can find the scroll, but he knows little of what passed below the mountain while he's been up here. We'll mention that we can talk to Esbern or Arngir for information, and we'll talk to them later. When we ask what to do with the scroll when we find it, he'll recap what he said earlier, and then mentions the creators of Dragonrend, Hakon, Gormlaith, and Feldir. These were the first mortals that Paarthurnax taught the Thu'um. They were mighty in their day, and Paarthurnax says that many heroes have come since, but none were greater than them. We'll ask how an Elder Scroll could cast Alduin through time, and we learn that the Dove are children of Akatosh, and are specifically attuned to the flow of time, and perhaps uniquely vulnerable to it. Paarthurnax then says that he warned the Nords against such a rash action, as he couldn't foresee its consequences. But they would not listen. This infers that Paarthurnax was there, and when asked, he'll say that a few of the dragons rebelled against Alduin's tyranny, and aided the humans in his overthrow. However, they were not trusted, and the inner councils were kept hidden from the Dove aiding them. Then he says he was far from here when Alduin met his downfall, but all Dove felt the sundering of time itself. We'll ask what Dragonrend actually does, and he does not know. He has never heard it used, as it was the first Thu'um created solely by mortals. It was said to force the dragon to experience the concept of mortality, a truly incomprehensible idea to the immortal Dove. We'll see more on that later. Then we'll ask if others besides the Greybeards come here to train. Others do not come here, and we are the first in over 100 years. Paarthurnax meditates on the words of power and counsel in their use, as that is enough for him. We'll ask how to meditate on the words, and he'll explain that knowing a word of power is to take its meaning into yourself. Contemplate the meaning, and you'll come closer to the word. Then he'll ask which of 3 words call us deeper to understanding: Fus, Fime, or Yol. Fus, as we already know, is force, but as we push the world, it pushes back. Then we're told to think of the way force may be applied effortlessly. Imagine a whisper pushing aside all in its path. That is the meaning of Fus, and we can learn to push the world harder than it pushes back. We'll gain the force without effort passive effect after this, where we stagger 25% less, and foes stagger 25% more. Useful for those of us using the classic shout. The other 2 words offer different effects as well. Fime means fade, and offers a 25% health recovery boost during the become ethereal shout. Yol means fire, and boosts fire breath shout damage by 25%. Not the greatest set of options in terms of shout boosts, but they all are helpful given that you'll probably have all 3 of these shouts by this point in the questline. With our conversation over, we'll talk to Arngir about the Elder Scroll. When we mention we need to find it, Arnie says they never concern themselves with the scrolls. The gods themselves would fear to tamper with such things, but as to where to find it, the blasphemies have always been the stock and trade of the mages of Winterhold. They may know something, so we'll consider visiting Winterhold. Whether we talk to Esbern or Arngir to progress this quest, they'll both push us to investigate the College of Winterhold specifically. When we reach the college, we'll meet Feralda at the entrance. She explains that the college is a place of wisdom and arcane knowledge where mages can safely reside in Skyrim. When we ask for entry, she'll ask what we wish to find within. There are several answers with different undertones, but we'll be honest Dan and seek the knowledge of the Elder Scrolls. Feralda says it is true that there are some here who spent years studying the accumulated knowledge of the scrolls, but what we seek doesn't come easily and can destroy those without strong will. Then she'll ask what we can offer the college, as all those that enter must show some degree of skill with magic. You can try to persuade your way through this, but it can be a bit tough. We'll mention that we're Dragonborn and demonstrate our shout. After that, she'll let us through. This whole sequence begins the College of Winterhold quest chain, which we'll be going over later. As such, I'll be skipping over some of it to progress the main questline. We'll enter the Arcanium, where we'll talk to the orc librarian here, Urag. We'll inquire about an Elder Scroll, and he asks if we even understand what we're asking for. When we ask for information on Elder Scrolls, Urag says they are instruments of immense knowledge and power. To read an Elder Scroll, a person must have special training, or they will go mad. As an added bonus, the Divines usually take the reader's sight as a price. Keep that in mind for another questline we'll see much later. We'll go over the price of using an Elder Scroll, as the price is usually for knowledge, to put it simply. But Urag says there's nothing simple about an Elder Scroll. It's a reflection of all possible futures and all possible pasts. Every reader sees different reflections through different lenses, and may come away with a very different reading. Then he says it's all true at the same time, even the falsehoods, which is grammatically ridiculous by virtue of the word falsehood. But we are talking about crazy magic here, so it's par for the course at this point. When we ask who wrote the scrolls, Urag says it would take a month to explain how that very question doesn't even make sense. The scrolls exist here and beyond. They are bits of divine made substance. Then he apologizes, as talking about the scrolls usually ends with irritating and vague metaphors like that coming up constantly. We'll ask if he has a scroll we can use, and he rebuffs us, saying if he did we think he'd let us see it? It would be kept under the highest security and no thief could touch it. We'll mention we're Dragonborn, and he'll change his tune, bringing us everything he has on the scrolls. He says not to get our hopes up, as it's mostly lies, leavened with rumor and conjecture. We'll inspect the books he gave us, and take interest in the Ruminations book, as it's incomprehensible. This also leads into another quest we'll go over later. For now, we'll learn that it was written by Septimus Cygnus, the world's master of the nature of Elder Scrolls, but he's been gone for a long while. He went up north in the ice fields, and they haven't heard from him since. It won't be marked, but the quest discerning the transmundane will lead us to an Elder Scroll. The game's way of telling you this isn't the best, and I can see several people getting stuck here because it looks like you've started a new quest, when that quest effectively slots in to help you with the main questline. It's just a little confusing. In any case, we'll leave and head north, using Become Ethereal to make a safe jump out a college window before we head through the icy waters towards Septimus Cygnus. He'll be in an ice cave, and we'll talk to him. We'll be going over what is relevant for the main questline, but we'll be coming back to him later for a Daedric quest. More on those later. Anyway, we'll mention we heard he knows about Elder Scrolls, and he'll say that he knows of one that was sequestered away nearby, insanely saying it's nearby on the cosmological scale, and he'll ask for help to open the Dwemer device nearby, and then he can help us. We'll help him open it by going to Blackreach, a hidden area underground that we'll need to find. Again, we'll go further into this quest and its lore and such later on. For now, we'll get 2 objectives from Cygnus that we'll use on our quest into Blackreach, and we'll be looking for Mazark afterwards. This will all make sense later, trust me. Before we leave, we'll ask him what an Elder Scroll is. He'll say that looking to the left or right are 2 different ways, but neither is any harder than the opposite. The scrolls look left and right in the stream of time. The future and past are as one. We'll also ask what he wants with the Elder Scroll, and he'll say that he wishes to unlock this Dwemer lockbox, but needs the visions from the scroll to open it. Again, more details later. With that, we'll head out to find Blackreach. First, we'll need to reach Alftand, as that will lead us underground. We'll arrive and find a few shacks with a bit of lore for a previous group of explorers who came here. We'll see their party members appear at different points along our journey, but before we head down, it's time for a reference. We'll return to the throat of the world and climb to the very top to find the Notched Pickaxe, a reference to Notch, the creator of Minecraft. It's a nice little reference with a pickaxe that boosts smithing skill, while equipped, and deals shock damage. If you ever wanted to fight with a useful pick, this is a great choice. We'll also find ebony ore next to it, and we'll mine the veins for our next set of armor. There's also malachite ore nearby, but that's just a bonus for us. We'll return to Alftan and head inside the glacial ruins. We'll find Sulla's journal, the leader of the exploration party we mentioned before. He goes over how the extreme weather forced them inside, and how he desperately wants to be remembered for discovering the secrets of this ruin. Then we'll find a necklace with a 25% boost to one-handed attacks, so we'll be using that with great gusto. Further in, we'll hear one of the party members, Jadar, asking where something is, mentioning that Jazar always tried to keep it for himself. Then he'll say there's got to be more skooma, another drug in the game, before he says to shut up and not to lie to him. He's clearly insane as he talks to himself, but we'll deal with him soon. We'll head deeper to find the corpse of a dwarven spider. The dwarves, or Dwemer, were a unique race that disappeared long ago. As such, their ruins are largely abandoned, save for the mechanical enemies they left behind like this spider. They often carry soul gems, dwarven material for smithing, and oil for crafting. We'll find research notes from the Explorers party where it goes over the spider's design and function of the soul gem. It also mentions lightning, as the spiders can sometimes use shock attacks. They'll often pop out of various points within the Dwemer ruins, or can be found patrolling the areas. They can be rather surprising, as they'll pop out of anywhere, so we'll keep our guard up. Then we'll run into Jadar proper, where he questions who we are, as we weren't trapped like the rest of the party. He'll fight us with a hand axe, and we'll kill him for being an insane, drugged-up kitty. There's a sentence that just happened. Anyway, we'll find Jazar dead nearby, apparently killed in his bedroll, and his journal details his brother's skooma addiction pushing him to hallucinations, and potentially killing someone else. We'll move forward and find another journal detailing another member of the party disappearing, Tally, and the gradual betrayal of trust between the surviving members of the party. We'll press on and run into Dwarven Spheres, another automaton enemy that rolls around as spheres, hence the name, until aggroed. We'll also find a little jumping puzzle where we'll hop from Dwemer thingy to Dwemer thingy in order to loot an upper area with a chest. Keep an eye out for Dwemer loot, as they get creative with where to find stuff. We'll do a little skip-a-roo to look around, and eventually we'll make it back around, and we'll reach the next area. We'll find Endrast's corpse, another party member, who goes over eyeless creatures taking the group in their sleep. Endrast managed to pick the lock, and they made a break for it, but Sulla went for finding what he came here for, and Umana went after him. Yag and Endrast tried for the top of the cave shaft, but one of the ramps was broken. Yag threw Endrast up and told him to run, and he did. He didn't look back, and ran like a coward. He could hear Yag fighting the eyeless beings, and didn't notice the arrow in his shoulder until he hid here. The metal creatures were all around him, and he was too terrified to move, so he died here. We'll move on, fighting through more Dwemer machines, until we come to a spinning blade trap. These traps are incredibly deadly, dealing high damage and usually blocking your escape or moving along a path. Be careful when dealing with these traps, as they have a high chance of killing you. Further along, we'll begin heading down and find Yag's corpse. We'll continue down a spiraling staircase to meet the eyeless creatures mentioned earlier. These are snow elves, or Falmer as they've become known at this point. They are blind, savage elves that dwell underground, so they'll usually be found in Dwemer ruins or caves. They vary between regular warriors, archers, mages, and then scale up to heavily armored Falmer. They also have bug pets that we'll see soon, that can be incredibly threatening and highly damaging. We'll learn more about them as we go through the game. Anyway, we'll continue through their living space, fending off several Falmer as we go, until we reach Valley's corpse. This was one of the first members of the group to disappear, and now we see what happened at the hands of the Falmer. We'll also find human flesh on another bloodied table, so who knows who that was. We'll find an elevator that takes us back up to the way we entered the ruin from, and we see how the Falmer quickly grabbed Valley and ran off so fast. Then we'll head back down to reach the bottom of the area as we deal with more Falmer and a spider pet of theirs. We'll continue through more Dwemer ruins and eventually reach another Falmer settlement where we'll clear the area and flip a lever to enter the Dwemer structure ahead. Inside, we'll fight the Dwarven Centurion, their beefiest fighter, who has high health and a breath attack that deals significant damage. They hit hard and can take a beating, so healing management is important when fighting them. On the plus side, they drop a lot of loot, so they do give rewards relative to their difficulty. Atop the Dwemer structure, we'll meet Sulla and Umana, as they're still alive. Then they'll start a fight, as Sulla is paranoid about everyone stealing his discovery, and we'll have to kill them both, as they are both hostile to us for some reason. I have no idea why we can't side with one or the other and get some dialogue after. Pretty disappointing if you ask me. We'll make sure they're both dead before we use one of the devices Cygnus gave us to unlock a stairway down from the apparatus in the center of the room. When we go down, we'll enter Blackreach, a large cavern with various locations to visit, with some leading back up to the surface. We'll fight through more Falmer and Dwemer robots before fighting the Chaurus. These are the Falmer's favorite bugs, as they use them for everything, as is evident in their armor, weapons, tents, chests, and so on. The Chaurus are usually tough, but what is especially dangerous is the poison they'll spew at you. It drains health quickly, and, when coupled with decent damage, can cause some serious pain. Anyway, we'll move on through the area, killing and looting as we can, until we make it to the Tower Mazark through another elevator. We'll explore the area to find a giant machine that we'll need to interact with. We'll find a skeleton on the ground near it that left a journal behind. It details that putting in a box turns it on, and the rings correspond to the buttons on the panel above him. He also mentions learning from a Khajiit that the light through the knowledge through the machine rests on the cube, basically meaning we'll be looking to aim the light a specific way. We'll insert one of Cygnus's devices, and we'll fiddle around with buttons until we unlock the appropriate light orientation. These puzzles are rare in the game, but they can be a bit random as it's not clear exactly how you're meant to figure them out. Granted, spamming buttons in random orders can make it work, but it's not as deep of a puzzle as much as it devolves into a button mashing session until things work out. Anyway, we'll eventually get the correct orientation of everything, and a crystal container will be lowered, holding the Elder Scroll. We'll grab it, this one labeled as Elder Scroll Dragon, and the next quest begins. Once we have the Elder Scroll, we can take the nearby lift out back to the surface and whirlwind spam our way around. This is a pretty useful way to haul excessive amounts of loot, as you can shout, wait, then shout immediately afterward, like so. It makes traversal of the area much more manageable, if you're one of the players that must loot absolutely everything. Anyway, we'll shout our way back to Whiterun to sort out our inventory. The guards will ask that we stop shouting, which we can lie to them saying we will, and then continue without consequence. Or you can exit the dialogue and they'll assume you've agreed to stop. Remember kids, just ignore what law enforcement says. It'll totally be fine. When ready, we'll return to the throat of the world and read the Elder Scroll within the Time Rift. When we do this, we'll be sent back to witness a cutscene of the ancient Nords defeating Alduin. I have to mention now that there can be a serious problem with this cutscene, where things won't progress. In other words, the characters talk, then when Alduin is supposed to appear, he doesn't, and you're stuck rewatching the cutscene over again until everything plays out properly. To be fair, in my playtime with the game, averaging somewhere between 800 to 1,000 hours across PC and console, I've only had this happen once. Still, it was annoying, and I hope nobody else has to endure it. Getting back to the cutscene at hand, we'll see the three heroes Paarthurnax mentioned earlier, Gormlaith, Hakon, and Feldir, fighting dragons around us. Before Alduin arrives, Feldir explains that Alduin cannot be slain like lesser dragons. This is why he brought an Elder Scroll, which the other two agreed not to use. Feldir didn't agree, and if all goes well, he won't need to use it. Hakon makes a comment that they will deal with Alduin here and now, hinting that maybe they did know it would send him through time, but that's up for debate. Then Alduin arrives and they fight him. They'll shout him down using Dragon Rend, with its three words being mortal, finite, and temporary. This shout grounds a dragon so they cannot fly. Alduin is surprised by this, and then curses Paarthurnax, as he knows he taught them to shout. Then Alduin threatens the Nords, saying they will feed his power when he comes for them in Sovngarde. Then Alduin fights the three of them, slowly picking off Gormlaith, and then Hakon tells Feldir to use the scroll. Feldir chants a chant to banish Alduin, and he disappears. Then Feldir says, "May the spirits have mercy on our souls." When we return to our time, Alduin will be here, and we'll fight him like they did. He will say that his belly is full of the souls of our fellow mortals. We will use Dragonrend to ground Alduin and give him a good smacking. Dragonrend also serves as a stun to dragons on the ground, so it can be chained to keep the dragon on the ground long enough to kill them. Given enough time, however, they can fly again. Anyway, we'll defeat Alduin in a sense, but he says he is firstborn of Akatosh, and cannot be slain here by us or anyone else, and the quest ends in the middle of something once again. Alduin says he will outlast us, and flies away. Then we'll need to talk to Paarthurnax, Arngir, or Esbern. We'll pick Paarthurnax, and he'll comfort us in our semi-victory that even the heroes of old were not able to defeat Alduin in open battle. Then we learn Alduin was always arrogant in his power, taking domination as his birthright. Then we'll need to learn where Alduin went. Paarthurnax suggests using Dragon's Reach in Whiterun to trap one of Alduin's allies to reveal his location. We'll have to convince the Jarl of Whiterun to allow this. Then he details that there were more dragons back in his time before the Akaviri came and wiped out most of the dragons. He says that he would visit the dragon captured in Dragon's Reach, but he was nearly crazed by loneliness and captivity. He did not even remember his own name. He doesn't know how he came to be caught, but the Jarl was very proud of his pet. If we talk to Arngir or Esbern, they'll both point us to do the same thing. Esbern will also give an optional quest to kill Paarthurnax, but I like him and think killing him is pretty stupid and dishonorable given what he's done for mortals, but we'll talk about that more later. We'll head to Jarl Balgruuf and ask to use his hold to capture a dragon. As expected, he thinks he misheard us, but we're serious. He can't do it with the threat of war on his doorstep, however. We'll mention that this situation is worse than we thought, and bring up Alduin's return. Balgruuf asks how we can fight him, and asks if his return means it's the end times. We'll tell him it may be the end, but we plan to go down fighting. "Spoken like a true Nord," he says, before saying he'll stand beside us. However, the Jarl can't allow a dragon capture attempt because of the Civil War. He's largely remained out of it, which puts him in a bind, as both Ulfric and General Tullius are waiting for him to slip up, and then they'll take military action against him. He needs a truce to be made while we deal with the dragon threat, but that will be difficult. He suggests the Greybeards host a peace council, and we'll talk to Arngir about hosting a little party. This begins the season Unending quest that will appear during the main quest line if the Civil War hasn't been completed. I say completed, but you just need to have 8 of the 9 holds under one side's control to skip this quest. I'm lumping it in here as it's a side quest within a quest, similar to discerning the Transmundane from earlier. Anyway, we'll go to Arnie and explain what happened with Alduin, as they heard the fight from High Hrothgar. We ask for help in capturing a dragon, and Arnie says what is overlooked in the Dragonborn is not permitted to any other followers of the Way of the Voice. Basically means they won't fight to help us. We'll tell them that we'll worry about capturing the dragon, but we need the Greybeards to help to stop the war. Arnie says the Greybeards have never involved themselves in political affairs. When we mention Jarl Balgruuf's situation, Arnie agrees to host a peace council, and then we're sent to talk to Ulfric and Tullius. We'll head to Tullius first, since we've already visited Solitude. We'll go over seeing him at Helgen and surviving, then we'll get to business. We bring up that we need a truce until the dragon menace is dealt with, and have to mention that he should negotiate from a position of strength. He makes an offhanded comment about the Emperor not sending reinforcements, and we'll learn that most of the Legion is tied down on the border with the Aldmeri Dominion, and can't afford weakening Cyrodiil's defenses. Anyway, he'll come, but he doesn't have much faith in it. Now we'll head to Ulfric and Windhelm. He'll remember us from Helgen, but then we'll mention the Greybeards' peace council. He says he can't agree to this unless Tullius himself will be there. This will be in reverse if you go to Ulfric first, but we'll also mention that Alduin has returned, so politics shouldn't matter. Ulfric seems to agree, and will appear at the council. We'll return to High Hrothgar and begin the council itself. Arnie seems unhappy to have so many violent people gathered in the halls whose very stones are dedicated to peace, but we are trying for peace, so it's a bit weird to have him say this. We'll learn that the ancient Nord word for war is season unending, so the title of the quest is very apt. Anyway, Arngir will moderate the peace talks as we take our seats. We'll have Imperials on the left, Stormcloaks and Blades on our right. We'll start with Ulfric insulting Elenwen coming here, and she explains that she has every right to be here to ensure nothing agreed upon violates the terms of the White Gold Concordat, the document signed to prevent the Aldmeri Dominion from destroying the Empire. We'll have the decision to let her stay or go, but that just begins the variations on this council. This council has 3 phases to it. the first being a bargaining back and forth about trading different holds and leaders for other holds and leaders. The Dragonborn facilitates this, and throws out suggestions that can be seen as reasonable or unreasonable depending on who gets what. Then Esbern gives an impassioned speech that the war only fuels Alduin's strength to get us back on track. Then we get another round of negotiations before we reach the final agreement. The negotiation can go many different ways based on a scale showing whether one side has been favored over the other. It works in a positive and negative way, with the score going positive when the Imperials are gaining something, and the score goes negative when the Stormcloaks are gaining something. This goes back and forth, with the general idea being trying to work towards a balanced 0. However, you'll never really be able to tell how this works without looking it up, but the conversation will give you clues as to which side is getting shafted or not. I'm front-loading all of this because this can play out several different ways, and at the end of the day, there's not much here that needs to be mentioned for the sake of the main quest. This impacts things if we choose to do the Civil War after this, but we'll be doing every questline fresh where applicable, so it won't apply. After lots of talking, the negotiation ends as follows in this run. Markarth will go to the Stormcloaks, with Jarl Igmund being replaced by Thongvor Silverblood. The Stormcloaks will withdraw from the Rift, and Jarl Layla Lawgiver will be replaced by Maven Blackbriar. Falkreath will be given to the Stormcloaks, and Dengbir of Stoon will return as Jarl. Both sides will spit insults at each other, and then we'll wrap up the quest with a truce. Then Arngir will ask how we plan to lure the dragon into Dragon's Reach. Esbern chimes in that he found a dragon's name in Skyhaven Temple's library of records that should align with one Alduin has resurrected. When we ask how that helps us, he explains that dragon names are always 3 words of power, and thus are shouts. By calling with the voice, he will hear us wherever we are. Dragons are not compelled to come, but they are prideful, and our voice should be intriguing after Alduin's defeat. We'll learn the dragon's name, Odahviing, or Winged Snow Hunter, and we'll learn the shout to call him. Then Delphine will pull us aside and mention that they know about Paarthurnax. When we ask what she knows, she says that like the Greybeards have been protecting him for all these years, even though they are pacifists. Then she goes full fundamentalist Blade, saying he needs and deserves to die, and it falls to us to kill him, but it doesn't stop there. Then she says, until he's dead, she and Esbern would dishonor their oaths as Blades if they continued to help us, which is an absolutely ridiculous oath to take and uphold now, given that Paarthurnax showed mortals how to shout in the first place, which led to the revolt against the Dragon Cult and ultimate victory against them, leading to all civilization and history as we know it. Tell me, what else would you prefer to happen back then? Not to mention how he's helping us now. When we ask why he needs to die, Delphine explains that he helped Alduin enslave our ancestors, then he betrayed Alduin, but Del thinks that makes him worse, not better. She thinks they can't afford to give Paarthurnax the opportunity to betray us in turn, and return to his old master. It's like they have no idea what we've been going through with Paarthurnax during this main quest. They claim to know the bigger picture, but it seems very much like the opposite, which I don't know if that's intentional on the developer's part. Anyway, this begins the Paarthurnax quest, one that I dislike with each passing day that I've known of its existence, and the more context I know, the worse it gets. It just makes the Blades look like fundamental idiots that are unaware of history they should absolutely know. It's one thing to be a great Dragonslayer, it's another to be so racist against dragons that you'll even kill the ones helping you. That goes beyond a code of conduct. That's just stupid. I usually don't bring up any of the social justice buzzwords, but I've never seen a case of fundamental racism in a game as badly implemented as with this quest. It just flies in the face of all logic and reason, especially given the context of the situation, and it breaks any cool factor the Blades have when you realize how illogical they are. They're worried about dishonoring their oath when they want to stab a guy in the back who's helped to save the world twice from Alduin's rule. Yeah, that's not honorable at all. Granted, he did bad stuff beforehand, but he drastically changed the world in our favor afterwards. If anything, this whole quest is some sort of self-congratulatory anti-honor. It's not even a worthwhile trade-off. You either kill a dragon that's helping you save the world, and boost some shouts for you, along with the friendship and wisdom of the Greybeards, or you lose the friendship of 2 old grumpy Dragonslayers who want to recruit and train more insanely dogmatic Dragonslayers. If they were going for a balanced choice with this one, the developers failed miserably. Getting back to good things, we'll head back to Dragon's Reach and talk to Balgruuf. He says they're ready, and we'll head out to trap Odahviing. We'll head outside to a large balcony area where we'll shout Odahviing's name. After a moment, he'll appear, taking a guard and flinging him to his death. I bet he was 3 days away from retirement. Anyway, we'll dragon rend Odahviing and lead him into the trap. Once immobilized, we'll interrogate him. He salutes our stratagem to capture him, saying we went to a great deal of trouble to trap him, and that he knows what we want. We confirm we want to find Alduin, and he explains that many of the dragons have begun to question Alduin's lordship, and whether his Thu'um is the strongest. None were ready to openly defy him, though. We'll get him back on point, and he'll explain that Alduin traveled to Sovngarde to regain his strength, devouring the souls of the dead, a privilege he jealously guards. His door to Sovngarde is at Skyrim, one of his ancient fanes high in the eastern mountains. He'll warn us that all Alduin's remaining strength is marshaled there. He will ask if he can be freed now that we've learned what we wanted. We'll ask if he'll promise to serve us, but he'll refuse until we defeat Alduin. Then he mentions that Skyrim requires the wings of dragons to reach it. He offers to fly us there, but not when he's in prison like this, and the quest ends in the middle of a conversation for the umpteenth time. Really wish they wouldn't do that. We'll continue and say we're at an impasse. Then we'll see Farengar come up to Odahviing, asking to allow him to do some tests. Odahviing angrily tells him to go away, but Farengar doesn't listen, saying he'll hardly notice him. Irileth says it's a very bad idea, and then Farengar takes a sample of the dragon, and he breathes fire before the Jarl tells Farengar to quit being a fool and stop. He runs off, and we're left to wonder what else he would have done to Odahviing. We'll talk to Odahviing again, saying we'll set him free if he promises to take us to Skyrim. He says it is wise to recognize when we only have one choice, before agreeing to comply with our request, as Alduin has proven himself unworthy to rule. Odahviing goes his own way now. We'll tell the guard to release the dragon, with him reminding us of the effort it took to capture him. Once freed, Odahviing will await our command to leave. He mentions that we'll see the world as only a dove can. We'll ride off into the distance on his back before arriving at Skyrim. Odahviing will look to our return, or Alduin's, then leaves, and will head through an army of Draugr and dragons. The Draugr are stronger this time around, throwing many Draugr scourges and wights at us. The Draugr scale up in the game until you reach the Deathlord variants, which are the toughest outside of specifically coded or named Draugr. Anyway, we'll fight our way up through Skyrim, killing many Draugr and dragons as we go through a few matching puzzles like we've seen before. Then we'll reach another claw door. We'll kill the Draugr White Lord carrying the claw, and we'll use the code to progress. It's a weird sequence where we really didn't need the claw door if the claw is going to be right next to it. May as well just remove the door and let us continue. If the claw was placed much earlier in the level, that would be one thing, but as it stands, the claw and the door being here just temporarily slows you down by a minute or so. There's no real advantage to have it here from a gameplay or story perspective. It's just a reference that there are claw doors around. This is one thing I've mentioned throughout my content, is that wasting the player's time is something I strongly believe developers should avoid where possible. Sure, loading screens, technical wait times, and downtime are to be expected, especially in open world games where you need breathing room in between locations and fights, or need time for the hardware to load things properly. Given that, you really don't need to add things if removing them doesn't change anything with progression to begin with. Like with this claw being right in front of its door, but enough claw complaints. We'll eventually reach the word wall containing the first word of Stormcall. Then we'll head outside and find a dragon priest guarding the portal to Sovngarde. Dragon priests are unique enemies found in unique areas and along unique quest lines throughout the game. They are sorcerers who were dragon cultists back in the day who hold masks of power that give various effects. We'll go over each mask as we come to them, or when we deal with what bonus content they lead to, but that'll be several hours down the road. In this case, the dragon priest Nakreen will already have been damaged, and his lines translate to, "Your life is mine. I was commanded by my overlord to keep this portal. You shall not escape. Bleed for your disobedience." I mentioned his text because the word Miraak appears, and that is strikingly similar to the main antagonist of one of the DLCs, Miraak, being only one letter off. There doesn't seem to be any significance to this, as Miraak's name means Allegiance Guide in the dragon language, but here it means portal. So I don't know if changing the lettering changes the word radically, or if the made-up language needs a few tweaks for the sake of consistency. In any case, we'll defeat him and loot his mask, named Nakreen, that increases magicka by 50 and reduces destruction and restoration spell costs by 20%. Useful for mages, but we aren't one, so we'll grab it and his staff and move on. We'll need the staff to activate the dragon seal, opening the portal to Sovngarde. We'll jump in, and the quest ends as we appear in the Nordic afterlife. Finally, an appropriate end for a quest. We're nearing the finale as we walk through Sovngarde. We'll see Alduin flying about in the distance, and we'll encounter a mist. We'll meet a Stormcloak soldier, who tells us to turn back, as terror awaits within it. If we ask, we'll learn he was killed in an Imperial trap. When we ask about the mist, he says none have passed through, and that Alduin hunts the lost souls snared within this valley. Then he asks if we can help lead these souls to Shore's Hall. We'll ask what that is, and he'll explain that it is the Hall of Valor, where heroes wait to follow Shore to the final battle. We'll need to gain admittance to Shore's Hall, so we'll continue through the mist until we reach the entrance to the hall itself. A long skeleton bridge guarded by a giant of a man. This is soon. He asks who we are and what brings us here. He'll inform us that he guards the bridge and winnows all souls whose heroic end sent them here. We'll say we pursue Alduin, and soon says no few have gone to face him since he has set his soul snare here. He mentions that Shore restrained their wrathful onslaught, perhaps knowing our doom. Then we'll mention that we seek entrance to the Hall of Valor, and soon rightly points out that we are living, and dare the land of the dead. Then he asks by what right do we request entry. A unique feature of this encounter is that you can have multiple titles by this point in the game, so you can call upon any of them once you reach soon. This varies depending on what organizations you join and what you accomplish in the game, but you'll always have the birthright of Dragonborn. We'll mention this, and Soon says it's been too long since he faced a doom-driven hero of the Dragonblood. Soon must judge us worthy before we may cross. We'll fight Soon until he approves our passage. He says it's been a long time since one of the living has entered here, alluding that we may not be the first, in which case, I want to learn that story. Anyway, we'll cross the Bone Bridge and enter the hall. We'll find ourselves in the company of Nord heroes of old, including Ysgramor himself. We'll learn more about him later. He says the doors have stood empty since Alduin set his snare, and that they haven't fought him per Shore's command. Then he recalls 3 champions ready to face him, naming Gormlaith, Hakon, and Feldir, the original 3 warriors we saw defeat Alduin in the past. If we choose to, we can look around, but there's no special dialogue deeper than references to this being a place of cheer, combat, feasting, and drinking, and that there is no fear in the hearts of those here for what Alduin is doing. We'll walk up to the 3 heroes of old, and Feldir explains that Alduin's mist is more than a snare. It is his shield and cloak, but with 4 voices combined, we can blast the mist, and bring him to us for a fight. Hakon says Alduin fears us, and then the quest ends. We'll head out for the final battle, and join our 3 companions in ending the World Eater's tyranny once and for all. We'll all use the Clear Skies shout against the mist. We'll receive a reduced cooldown for this shout for the sake of the quest, as we must do it multiple times, as Alduin recasts the mist over and over until we force him to fight. Once he arrives, we'll dragon rend him as fire and brimstone fall from the heavens, similar to what happened in Helgen when he first appeared. Sadly, this fight is bogged down by the fact that it's your average dragon fight with some extra content and visuals around you. The fight itself isn't that impressive, and will eventually defeat him. He'll disintegrate once killed, and the quest will end. The Aftermath has soon say this was a mighty deed, and that Sovngarde is cleansed of Alduin's snare. They will sing of this battle in Shore's Hall forever, but our fate lies elsewhere. When we complete our life, Soon will gladly welcome us back to join in the blessed feasting. Then the 3 heroes will praise us and look forward to our formal joining with them when the time is right. When we're ready to return to the world of the living, we'll talk to Soon. Before we go, he'll give us a gift from Shore, a shout to bring a hero from Sovngarde in our hour of need. Then Soon will shout us back to the throat of the world. We'll find ourselves surrounded by dragons, including Paarthurnax and Odahviing. The dragons will then chant a few words before flying off, translating to, Alduin has fallen, the mighty overlord is vanquished, the Dragonborn slew him, his voice is silenced, we are free of fealty. They repeat Alduin has fallen a few times, but that's the gist of it. We'll talk to Paarthurnax, as he doesn't seem too happy that Alduin is dead. Alduin was once the crown of their father Akatosh's creation. We did what was necessary, as he had flown far from the path of right action in the arrogance of power. However, he was still Paarthurnax's brother once. We'll say the world is a better place without Alduin, and Paarthurnax will say perhaps it is, and at least it will continue to exist. As we told him earlier, the next world will have to take care of itself. He mentions that melancholy is an easy trap for a Dova to fall into, then says we have won a mighty victory, and to savor it. It is not the last of what we will write upon the currents of time. Then he'll fly up, saying he feels younger than he has in many an age. The dragons may bow to his Thu'um with Alduin's absence, but willing or not, they will hear it. If we wait a bit, Odahviing will fly down and talk to us. He'll wish the Old One luck in his quest, but he doubts many would wish to exchange Alduin's lordship for the tyranny of Paarthurnax's Way of the Voice. As for Odahviing, we've proven our mastery twice over, and he acknowledges the power of our Thu'um. If we call for him, he will come if he can. Then he flies off. We'll visit the Blades, and Esbern will say Delphine has been worried about us after hearing we left Whiterun on the back of a dragon, again proving their argument for killing dragons to be a faulty one. We'll inform her of Alduin's defeat, and she says the news was greater than she'd hoped. Then she'll mention she never imagined where it would all lead when we walked into her inn all that time ago. For all we know, it's been a week, a month, a year since then. Who knows? Afterwards, both Delphine and Esbern will mention killing Paarthurnax again, with talking to Esbern saying that the dragon committed many atrocities during his aid of Alduin. Whether he truly repented or acted to save himself, justice demands he pay with his life, even though he helped free the entire race of mortal beings when he had no reason to think they'd win in the first place. They literally couldn't win without his help in teaching them shouts. I swear, this Blade's quest to kill Paarthurnax is the most misguided of all the quests, even over Assassins and Thieves quests we'll see later. Anyway, we'll loot a dump of stuff we left behind earlier and then steal Blade's gear because they can go die in a fire for all I care at this point. When we look back on it, they didn't help us as much as the dragons or the Greybeards. Think about that for a moment. Granted, they pointed us in the right direction for a few things, but in terms of actually helping to save the world, they did very little by comparison. They even tried to kill those that were helping us, especially when they provided a service that we couldn't work around, like Odahving's flight to Skuldafn, so take that into consideration. All in all, we saved the world and looked cool doing it. In the end, that's all that matters. And with that, Dragonborn Dan will rest. For now. With the main quest completed, we'll be moving on to the other major quest lines. We'll be tackling different things in different videos, so stay tuned for more. There will be a link to my game commentary playlist in the description, so keep an eye on that if you want to watch my other stuff, or if you want to find where all the Skyrim videos will be. Hopefully it won't take me too long to make each video, and I should be able to tackle the next one pretty quickly. For now, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and God bless.